Yo, what up, guys? We are back. So we got Not So Erudite, known as Kyla, right?
Not so erudite. Yeah, Kyla.
Kyla, okay. I butchered your username, but I got your.
You know what? I think you had the most creative butchering though of my username, so you get points for that.
Thanks. I worked hard on it. As I was driving today, I was thinking about how am I going to butcher her name today.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's see. Not
yeah.
so, dude. But
I
yeah.
get
So
erudite a lot.
Erudite.
I don't even know what you said. Erudite? Erudite?
Dite.
Yeah. There you go.
But yeah, so if you guys missed it, we did a part one. It was a really good combo about 2 weeks ago, and we had a good discussion. We discussed a lot of interesting topics. So yeah, this is gonna be like kind of continuation of that because in the first one I had to dip, but this time I got all night, so we can really get into it.
Awesome.
But yeah, do you want to start off for anyone who didn't see the first one? Do you want to start with like a quick introduction?
Sure, yeah. And probably vice versa. So my name
Sure.
is Not So Erudite or Kyla. I am a streamer, obviously. I stream on Twitch and YouTube typically. You can also find me on TikTok. I tend to talk a lot about politics, psychology, and I'm mostly interested in like sociocultural stuff. So like dating, gender relationships, just dynamics that are impacting our culture, mostly in like North America today. So that's who I am.
Oh, cool. I'm mainly focused on issues that happen in Afghanistan, so that's kind of my focus. I'm interested
Very
in.
niche.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Alex. I'm a sex and dating coach. I specialize in giving like practical, no bullshit, tangible advice instead of like ideological or like theoretical that you see a lot in the dating channels. I try to be as neutral as possible and get the real truth. So yeah, so that's basically what I do. Yeah, so I think the first discussion we were talking a lot about like the ethics of the pickup community. We were discussing that. Do you remember where we left off?
Um, I'm not completely. I was trying to convince you to use no-oriented questions.
Right. Oh yeah. So I actually had a realization on that. I realized that with my girlfriend, I actually do that all the time. But I think the problem with using that data is me and my girlfriend pretty much do whatever the other. Well, not like that we're pushovers, but like she
Yeah.
never says no to me. I never say no to her, basically.
Yeah.
So it's like I can ask the question to her and be like, in the most like I can be like, babe, how much do you not want to I don't know, cuddle? And she'd be like, I'm down, right? So I do think that for me to really get good data on this, I would have to try it in like at a bar or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there is interesting data in sales stuff of comparing like things like yes momentum to no-oriented questions and stuff like that, and like different techniques. And no-oriented questions is actually like super efficacious as a tactic. And like I said, it feels more right, but I don't know how much you want to get into like quibbling over yes momentum. Again, I did actually realize there was something going on which I wasn't when I rewatched it. I was like, oh shucks, I should have clarified this better. So when you were talking about yes momentum, you're almost exclusively just talking about momentum in general, because you would talk about like going to multiple locations and making the date really interesting. Be like, would you be opposed to going here? Are you comfortable going to this bar, this next location? Which is very different than the actual like focused sales technique of yes momentum, which like the whole goal of yes momentum is characterizing your questions to get the individual to say the words yes as much as possible. So you're doing like tricky questions, especially that like everyone would self-evidently say yes to over and over again. Because that's the psychological trick of basically when you prime people to say yes over and over, it actually just creates like a greater mental load to say no, essentially. And so like that's the main thing is like I don't want to like ever have somebody be like tricked into saying the words like yes or like some sort of like yes, yeah, affirmative thing versus just like momentum, because momentum is, in my view, just called being really good at planning dates and being really interesting.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a fair distinction. I would just say that I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like I don't think you can like yes momentum a girl into like meaning like I can't be like on a date be like, hey, do you like pasta? Yes. Do you like penne pasta? Yes. Do you want to have sex? Yes. Got her. Bam. We had a verbally binding deal. Can't go back on that. Like like I feel like the girl has to like you and the girl has to like want to have sex with you. You can't just like I don't know. Maybe you could like yes momentum into someone to buying something that costs like $3, but I don't think you can yes momentum into someone buying a $30,000 purchase And I would argue that sex for most girls is like the more expensive purchase. It is like, I think, a decision that most girls, don't make super lightly. I mean, obviously there's levels of that. So I don't know. Like, would it even be possible to like, yes, momentum trick a girl into sex?
The issue is it's hard to call it a trick, right? Because it's not like she like accident she's like, I said yes and oh my gosh, oops, I meant to say no. It makes it so that like at the beginning, if she would be uncomfortable, so if she would have kind of said no from the beginning, you're using a trick to get her to more likely to say yes rather than getting her more likely to say yes because she feels more comfortable and more connected to you, right? And that's the main thing. Is I don't want a tactic that the whole goal is getting her to say yes because it's like the easy way versus just like, if she wants to say yes, you've achieved that by like having her feeling comfortable and connected to you. Because I'm not opposed to people having sex. I'm not opposed to people having casual sex. I just want to make sure that all the parties are like as safe as possible. And I recognize that there's like issues in general with consent. And so I want to make consent as easy as possible and as like nuanced as possible because most conversations around like consent, for example, I'm sure you'd agree, are horrible. It's usually like reduced to like no means no and yes means yes and also rape bad. And it's like, okay, but here's the issue. No means yes all the time. And also most consent is done through implied. So there's almost no verbal, like there's no verbal affirmation or declining. And also consent is really messy. And sometimes it's revoked midway through implied body language as well. And
Right.
what the fuck does that mean? Right. And so when it comes to like casual dating and stuff, I just want to make sure that I've got an ethic behind all my strategies that are keeping every single party as safe as possible, first and foremost, before like I'm focusing just on sex. Because I want people to have sex, but I don't want people to have sex at the risk of like having sex when they don't want to. Buyer's
Yeah, no,
remorse is bad.
yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I would still say that I don't think it's even if you want to, I don't think it's possible to like, yes, momentum a girl into sex. Like the only way you could have sex with a girl, aside from like rape, obviously, which obviously is a no-no, is if she wants to have sex with you, right? Like I think that you can maybe use like some form of trickery or whatever to maybe get her phone number. You could yes momentum her into the phone number where like you're like talking and you're like, oh cool, blah blah blah, and you give her your phone. You can kind of do that, but that's going to be a flaky number where the girl's not going to respond anyway. Like when I first got into pickup, I did used to do stuff like that. I used to try really hard to like convince, like if the girl's like, oh, I don't know, blah blah blah. I would try really hard to get her number, but then I realized that like those numbers are super flaky anyway. So what's the point of doing that? So I'd rather just be like more casual and only get the number if the girl really wants to, because that's the only way the girl's going to respond anyway. But I don't think sex is like that. I think like you could kind of like fool your way into a phone number or an Instagram handle. I don't think that's doable with sex. I think the only way you can I think the only way you can fool your way into sex if you do things like lying and misleading and manipulation. So, for example, if you're like, no, 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 I am looking for a relationship too, I promise you, and then you use a lie to alleviate her concern when all you want to do is like smash and dash. So yes, I do definitely think there are ways you can manipulate your way into getting laid. I just don't think this is one of them.
Yeah, that's fair. Have you ever heard of the concept of like overcoming last minute resistance?
Yeah, all the time. I talk about it from
Okay.
time to time.
Okay. Anything that has to do with overcoming last minute resistance to me feels very sketchy because if a woman has last minute resistance to sex, probably you should take that as an implied no just for safety. Even if she might end up being okay with it, the risk is so high for both parties that any skill that's dedicated towards something like last minute resistance, particularly around intercourse, I think is a really really dangerous and bad idea.
Okay, yeah, let me reply to that. This is something I try not to talk too much about on YouTube because it's very easy to misinterpret this and have disastrous consequences. So typically, I'll still respond. But I'm just prefacing that by saying, like, if I'm being somewhat vague on this topic, it's for a reason. That's because like this is a very tricky area. But there are overcoming last minute resistance can be ethical or can be unethical. Depends on how you do it and what kind of LMR it is. So I'll give you an example of a way it can be done ethically, or that's not problematic. A lot of women, especially ones who are victims of sexual assault or rape or whatever like that, they want to have sex with you, but they want to feel like they have the power. So even if they want to do it, they will say no because they want to see how you react to that. And all you have to do is just be cool with it and not be reactive. And then literally 2 minutes later, they'll be like, okay, let's do it. Right. They're doing that to see because they have trauma in the past, right? Is this guy going to take no for an answer? And literally all you have to do when that happens with girls like that is be like, okay, cool, no worries. And just keep a fun, playful vibe. And then 2 minutes later, vast majority of the time, the girl will be down, right? So that's one way of overcoming last minute resistance that I think is, you wouldn't say that's problematic, would you?
I just don't know if I would even label it overcoming last minute resistance. You're basically describing a girl says no to you. It sounds like a bit of a shit test. And all you say is, oh, well, when she says no, you respect the no. And it's like, well, that's not really overcoming last minute resistance at all. That's just like, looks like when you respect the woman and she feels safe, it's going to lead. And I believe you that a lot of women do this. And in fairness, I talk to a lot of women about like the dangers of shit testing, but you're basically saying like when a girl says no, basically respect it. And she's actually going to be more likely to like you afterwards, which is great because that's basically just teaching people to respect boundaries. It just doesn't feel like the same idea when I hear people talk about overcoming last minute resistance. I'll hear things like yes, momentum use, which is way like when a girl's hesitant to get her to say yes if she otherwise might have not fallen on that side.
Yeah, so there's many different kinds of last minute resistance. I just wanted to pick like a really innocuous example, and then we can kind of pick one that's a little bit more gray. But yeah, like I would consider anything where you guys are on the verge of having sex, and the girl puts a pause on that. Anything like that comes after that is a form of last minute resistance, assuming the girl like actually wants to have sex and she's just not like. So, for example, if the girl's like, "No, I don't want to have sex," and she really doesn't want to have sex, that's not really last minute resistance. The girl not want to have sex. Last minute resistance if she puts a pause or the brakes, but she really does want to have sex. That would be like, anything that happens after that would be LMR. So that's like an example of one that's like pretty easy and straightforward. Let's do one that goes down the end of the spectrum, like something that we would consider unethical, which would be like, I don't know, like shaming the girl, right? So that would be like the girl's like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to do this. And you're like, oh, come on, like every other girl does it. Like, what are you going to be like a prude? You're going to be like a prude little bitch, right? Like, we would probably agree that like shaming a girl into fucking you is unethical, right? So now we've established the parameters for like something that's clearly ethical and clearly unethical when it comes to LMR, right? But then the interesting area comes in the gray, right? There's a lot of gray in between that. So let me try to think of a good one.
What about boundary pushing? So yes, momentum is very, very commonly used for boundary pushing, right? So say she's putting a pause, you guys are making out, and then she's like, I'm not sure if I want this to go further. And so you might be like, well, are you okay if I like run my hand up your leg? And she might be like, well, yeah, I'm okay with that. And then you'd be like, okay. So you like run your hand up your leg and be like, well, are you okay with me like touching you here? And she might be like, yeah. And you start doing little small baby steps to get her to say yes to increasing levels of essentially physical boundaries. So she said, no, I don't want to have sex. Let's assume in this case, she said explicitly, no, I don't want to have sex. And then you start doing incremental things to push the boundaries to be like, well, no to sex, but what about leg touching? Well, what about like, what about your breast? Can I touch your breast? What about like, can I kiss you more deeply on your, like all these little things to the point where she might eventually kind of be like, okay, I guess we can have sex. The issue is that I know I've spoken with a lot of women who've been in that precise situation of this like soft, constant boundary pushing where they feel bad, they feel stupid. They're like, well, I am okay with all those other things. So why wouldn't I just be okay with sex? They'll agree to having sex. And most of them wouldn't say I was sexually assaulted, but they'd come away and they'd feel a lot of like shame, remorse, and they'd feel manipulated. And it's like, that's a really bad situation. I'd be curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I would call it like baby stepping, but yeah, it's basically the same thing. So I would argue that first of all, you would want to do all that stuff before even the girl says no. So if you bring a girl back to your place, like the mistakes some guys make, there's this like funny story about a client. One of my buddies had, who's also a coach, who what he would do is he would bring girls back to his place, and then what he would do as soon as they would walk in is take his clothes off, put a condom on, and lay in bed. And he was like confused why girls weren't sleeping with him. And he's like, well, I thought I was just being safe, right? Like, say girls like safe sex. I'm like, yeah, but let's like complete 0 to 60. Like, even the girl's horny, like that's like way, like you'd come back with to the guy and he just gets naked, puts a condom on, like, okay, let's have sex. Like, most girls are not going to go for that. They're going to be like, okay, dude, I'm leaving. So I would argue that's like an extreme example. I would argue, but a less extreme example that happens all the time is guys bring a girl back to his place and he's like, hey, let's go in my room. Right. And the girl's like, whoa, I don't know about this yet. Like that's a pretty rookie mistake. So what I do, for example, when I bring a girl back, I pour her a drink, we go on my balcony, we talk a little bit. I don't like just whip my dick out or something like that. Maybe I'll start making out with her, then I'll kiss down her body. Right. Maybe like put her hand like over the pants. Right. And then it's a very smooth and progressive thing. Right. So that's happening irregardless of like the situation. It's just like something you should do because you're like women are knob, right? You can't just go like there's a common saying that men are like a light switch where it's like on and off. Women are like a knob, like you slowly turn the knob. So I would argue that's something that should be done regardless. Now, in terms of like what you described, where the girl has like said no, like, oh, I do not want to have sex, assuming she means it, and you want to like figure out, okay, I think it's okay within reason. So meaning like just because girls don't want to have sex might mean she's comfortable doing other things like I don't know, giving you a hand job or like having oral sex, right? Like that's happened to me plenty of times where girls like, hey, I don't want to have sex, but I'm cool with doing everything else, right? So that's like there's really no other way to figure that out without actually like figuring out what she's into, right? Because quite often, again, when a girl goes back to your place, it means she's at least somewhat interested in you, but she might have a hard rule that she doesn't have sex on the first date or whatever. She's like trying to save herself for Jesus. I don't know what it is, but she could be down with like oral stuff, right? Or with second base or whatever. So I think there's really no way you're going to figure that out without like actually like figuring out what she's comfortable with or not. I think it's up to her at that point if something's making her uncomfortable to say no. But I would also argue, like, if I had a daughter or something like that, I would tell my daughter, like, hey, listen, if you're not interested in having sex with a guy, my advice is don't go home with him because not every guy's going to be good at like reading the situation. And that just feels like at best you're going to get an awkward situation, and at worst it could be something worse. So I do think like it's important for women to be cognizant of that. And like if they don't want to have sex with a guy, it's totally fine. And there's no rule that says if they go home with a guy, they have to fuck him, right? They can change their mind, but it's just better for both parties if a girl like puts the brakes on it before they even get to the house.
I guess I'll kind of respond sequentially. So any sort of tactic that's whole goal is getting a no to convert to a yes seems a little bit dangerous to me, especially to be telling to like young men. Particularly, I immediately think about young men who are very bad at social reading, are not good at understanding implied no's, right? The issue for a lot of women, I'd be curious, would you agree with the statement that I would say women are broadly not socialized to be overly good at boundaries or saying no? I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Probably. I think they're getting better at it, but yeah, probably I would agree.
They're definitely getting better at it, but broadly, we kind of teach women to be pretty agreeable, to be permissive, and there's some biological evidence that women in general also tend to be more agreeable and stuff like that. And so in general, so we can kind of take this conversation two ways because there's a lot of conversation to have about like the onus on the women. Because in all of this conversation, I would never want it to sound like women are basically like children and they must be fully caretaken for and they can't speak for themselves. And you should just assume all of their thoughts and hopefully you get it 100% right. And women are not responsible for any part of a sexual negotiation. That is not my belief at all. The issue is it's hard to talk about women's roles unless we just want to talk about that. Or we can talk about men's roles, and we can talk about both, but I think we actually have to talk about them separately because if you're talking about men's responsibility within sexual negotiations and you just start talking about what women should be doing, we kind of miss what men need to be doing and vice versa. And I think both sides do an issue with this. So I would agree, right? If you don't want to sleep with the guy, I think in general, it's much safer for women to never go home with the guy, especially on the first couple of dates. My advice to women is typically prepare three boundaries, essentially three boundaries that you're comfortable delivering with escalating levels of firmness in your boundary. So for example, if you're not comfortable with something, a soft boundary can basically be like a walk away or a timeout or being like, hey, I just need to go to the bathroom. It is. Going to the bathroom is a really, really soft, easy way for a girl who's feeling uncomfortable to get out of the situation because a lot of women do unironically feel nervous in these like intimate one-on-one situations, which again, there's a whole bunch of our issue around that as well. So I'd agree with that. The issue is that if we understand that women are broadly not very good at boundaries, if on our date we've both drank some level of liquor, and then you've also been taught a number of skills that are pretty good at essentially slowly increasing her comfort with what you're doing so that something that maybe would have been a no is now a yes, especially if at the end of the day, your purpose and full goal is just exclusive to have sex or in my view to get yours. If your goal in a sexual negotiation is just to get yours, I think there's a problem from the very start, and it concerns me about the safety of both parties involved.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't believe in like having a selfish mindset. I think looking at it from a purely pragmatic perspective, you're going to be more successful if you have like, hey, let's have both parties win. This should be a win-win. Sex should be a win-win for both parties. I this is something I disagree with feminists on, and also like red pillars on, because they both argue that sex is like something for the man, right? Not all feminists, but some. I've heard this argument on that side too, and I think sex can and should be a win-win. In terms of like the going back to the initial thing, in terms of like the boundary pushing, well, I would say that maybe you might have a point if the goal of like the let's call it boundary pushing or whatever, or like progressive escalation, is to get her to change her initial answer about sex, right? So she said no to sex, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna like slowly up the ante until she says yes to sex. Then you might be able to make an argument for that. But if the goal is just to like find out what else she's comfortable with, I don't see that's problematic. You're like, okay, she doesn't want to have sex. Maybe she's down to have oral sex. I don't think there's anything wrong with like finding that out.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were done. I like to write down what people are saying to me. Feminists say sex is for man. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't, just so it's clear, I don't actually identify as a feminist. I have a
No,
hard
I know
time
you
with the
don't. I know you
movement.
don't. Yeah.
But I also don't know if I've ever heard most feminists say that. I've heard like if you go into like really radical areas, they're going to say things like, for example, like men are extremely selfish and sex is really dangerous with men. But I think most feminists are pretty big about like most feminists that I talk to around sex and stuff. They're pretty big on like educating men and women about like women can enjoy sex, how to get off. There's a big issue with women and orgasming in sex and stuff like that. So a lot of the communication I have with feminists about sex and women is pretty sex positive for women.
Oh, can I clarify that position?
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
you made a good point. So, okay, I think what's happening, I actually kind of made a mistake. So, in like where I live in Miami, there's a huge like sugar baby community, and quite often it's tied with feminism. So there's like a little bit of an interlap where you see like these sugar baby feminists who are like, yeah, fuck men, like men are pigs, right? So I'm gonna get mine, and they like literally are like, yeah, like you shouldn't just give sex to a man. You should try to get shit from him first. Like, why would you just fuck a guy, for free, right? You can get a handbag out of it. So like those communities in like cities like Miami and LA have actually become like kind of like conflated and tied into each other, which is really weird because
It's
like I think
horrifying. That's so
sugar baby
scary.
is like kind of counterintuitive to feminism, right? It's
Yeah.
counterintuitive, but they have become conflated. So that's kind of where that statement is coming from.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you the benefit. I don't know anything about Miami, so I'll just give you the benefit of the doubt that that's true about the culture. I've heard similar things about LA and Miami being kind of the hookup culture being very unique in that way. So that's fair. I'll kind of move on. If the goal is to get her to say yes to something she'd say no to, you basically would agree that that's a really bad thing. And so that's fair. I guess maybe I should poke your brain then a little bit because I watched your conversation with Destiny. And I think somebody else, it was a black pill guy as well. And I remember somebody asking you the question, or maybe you asked the question of would you rather have sex with a really, really attractive woman who's okay at sex or an average woman who's extremely good at sex? I find the answer to this really interesting. I'm curious about, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I forget your answer to that question.
So my answer would be a really attractive woman who's okay at sex. I don't think there's like a right or wrong answer to this, by the way. I think there's a little preference. Yeah, but I think that sex is largely mental. I think women are pretty aware of that, but I think men still like are under the impression that's physical, which is why like having sex with a prostitute who's a 10 is for most guys not going to be nearly as satisfying as having sex with a girl who's into them who's a 7, right? There's more to it than just whatever like that. And I think looks is a humongous part of the picture. Looks and attraction. So assuming all other factors are equal, meaning both the average girl and the really hot girl are into you, right? I think that for me it would be much more rewarding in terms of like how much enjoyment I would get with a hot girl who's average at sex. Plus, also I feel like sex is something that can be taught. So maybe the first time it's not going to be that great, but then you kind of explain to her what you're into. And I think most women, unless they're like I don't know, like ultra lazy and they just want to starfish out, they're going to be able to more or less like kind of, improve, so as to speak.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious what you think. Basically, my hot take would be if you choose the first one, a really attractive girl who's average at sex, sex is fundamentally about status first and foremost, which I think would be a very honest answer. I think for a lot of people, we're taught that sex is fundamentally status, especially for men. And so if she's significantly more attractive, you're going to gain more status. And you might even like that situation more because of the fact that you know that there is a status piece coming with the fact that you're having sex with this girl. But then my argument would be you're not actually interested in sex in and of itself. You're interested in status exclusively. Well, probably not exclusively. I'm sure getting off is nice, but if sex was about pleasure, you would take the woman who's really good at sex 9 times out of 10. Because let's assume this is a vacuum. You're never having sex with them again, so you can't teach the attractive woman how to be better at sex. It's one-time deal. I think if you choose the first, then you essentially sex is dominantly about status for you.
Yeah, I can see how you come to that conclusion. That's the argument Destiny made. I can tell you I fundamentally disagree with that for myself. The stat, like I'm at a point, like I don't know how to say this without sounding braggy, but like I've already hooked up with hundreds and hundreds of girls. I've hooked up with really hot girls. I've hooked up with really average girls. I've hooked up with some below average girls, right? I've done it all. Pretty much any kind of sexual situation I've been in. Like the status part and like the dopamine high of the validation part has like long exceeded for me. Like that hasn't been present there for years. Like to me, the reason I have sex is purely for the enjoyment of the activity. And so the kind of the point where I'm at now, the enjoyment of the activity is just significantly higher for me the more attractive I find the girl, because I'm just so much more into it, right? So again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that sex is largely mental. And that's why, like, for example, this guy, Turd Flinging Monkey, he was on my channel and he was trying to explain to me how having sex with a sex doll is better than the average girl. He's like trying to explain to me, like, well, they have a 30 RPM spinning vagina. Have you ever been with a girl? Does your girlfriend have a spinning vagina? I'm like, no, but I would argue that having sex with my girlfriend is still way more satisfying than this like artificial sex doll you have. He's like, but look how hot my sex doll is. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's a good looking sex doll you got there, but like, I still prefer my girlfriend, right? Again, because it's largely mental, right? And so, in the same logic that even though the sex with the sex doll might be better because of like the fucking spinning vagina, whatever thing, I don't know. I've never fucked a sex doll, for the record. I'm just assuming that according to his logic, maybe it is better. It's still way more satisfying and enjoyable to have sex with a real girl. And in that same token, it is more enjoyable to have sex with a girl you find really attractive than a girl that you find so. It's not that like unattractive girls are typically worse at sex, but guys get like
no, this is just the hypothetical we're creating. Yeah. So we're not making any claims about like sex skill and actual physical appearance.
No, I got you. But it's just always so much more enjoyable the more into the person you are. And guys are largely visual, so that's going to be a huge part of it. Now, that it's not to say that that's the only component. Like, I think a more interesting, like, I guess, hypothetical would be like, would you rather have sex with a girl who's average looking, but you have insane amounts of sexual chemistry, or a really hot girl that you have no sexual chemistry with? That becomes more difficult. That's like, that's a tough one right there. Like, I don't know if I would have a clear answer to that. But if it's purely in terms of sex skills, I'm still going to get way more enjoyment from the attractive girl, regardless of the status part, even if I don't tell anyone. And I don't really I'm at a point where I don't need to like show off every girl I sleep with. Even if no one finds out, even if like completely validation aspect aside, like none of that, even if all that matters in a vacuum, it'll still be way more enjoyable because I'm going to be so much more turned on by the girl visually. And then again, sex is largely mental.
So do you think that the sex itself would be better? Like you would enjoy the sex more, or you would just prefer it?
Yeah, so like if you're watching, like let's say you videotape all your hookups and you're watching it, it might be exactly the same. Like there might not be any kind of difference, but you would just be so much more into it.
See, I feel like part of what makes you into it, though, is there's some level of validation, right? If you're sleeping with somebody who you decide is like a 10, then that means that 10 wants to be there at that moment having sex with you, which is valuable, right? Even if you're not telling your friends, there's something like deeply satisfying. No, like I can basically pull in a really attractive girl. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think maybe for a lot of guys that might be the case, but like I can say for myself and a lot of like the friends I have, like when you get to a certain point where you've slept with hundreds of girls, you've been with every type of girl, like the validation goes away. It's just like you've already done it so many times. There's like nothing new. So if I hook up with a 10 tonight, the only exception could be is if it's like a celebrity. I would say I would probably still get some validation if it's like Kim Kardashian. But aside from the celebrity factor, right, it's just a normal girl who's really attractive. there's no validation. Like I hook up with attractive girls all the time. I don't get that like validation high that I used to get. I sort of wish I did because it was really fun. It just hasn't been there for years. So that hasn't applied to me in years, and it hasn't applied to a lot of the people I've talked to who hooked up with a lot of girls. Is still like you still just it's just still a more enjoyable experience because you're a lot more. I guess you can say you're a lot more immersed in the experience because you're just so turned on by the girl. Like I don't know, it's kind of a personal thing, but like sometimes like I'll like video record like right like my sex sessions and I'll watch it back and like in the moment it feels like oh my god this was like an epic porno, but then you watch it back afterwards you're like oh this is just like really boring plain looking sex, but in the moment it was like this is the craziest porno ever. Oh my god, me and this girl are just like this is going to be like like if I want to put this on Pornhub this will be number one porno because you're so immersed in the experience, but then you watch it back afterwards you're like oh this was like pretty standard sex. That's how it looked like.
So, in your mind, is there a difference between a woman being sexy versus being like attractive to you?
No,
Like,
I
could a
think
less attractive woman be more sexy?
um I guess a little bit. I think like the way the woman carries herself
Mhm.
and how seductive she is could affect her sexiness. So you could have a situation where the girl's like a 6 and one girl's a 7, but the girl who's a 7 is like a klutz and she like, maybe she's really inexperienced versus the girl who's a 6 is like really seductive and she knows how to move her body and she knows how to flirt with you, right? So that girl might be more sexy, yeah. But I do think
Okay.
looks directly affect sexiness.
Would you rather have sex with a woman who's like a 10 on the sexy scale, but a 7 on the attractiveness, or a girl who's a 7 on the sexy scale and a 10 on attractiveness?
That's a tough one. Yeah, that's a tough one. Um, I don't think I have like a solid answer for either one of those. I think like
You have to
if,
pick one.
if I had to pick one, oh
Yeah.
man, um, probably a 10 in terms of sexy because she's a 10 in terms of sexy, and then she moves her body so well and she's so seductive that I'm so immersed in the experience that the fact that she's not a 10 visual wise is not something I can even register as in my brain. There are situations, this is like such a guy thing where like you have sex with a girl and you're like oh my god this chick is so hot, but then you realize afterwards like maybe when you hang out with her second time like what this girl's not nearly as attractive as I like envision her in my mind, right?
Right.
That's like such a dude thing. It happens all the time, and that's like largely because it's just like you were so immersed in the experience and she was so sexy in that moment that your brain just completely overvaluated her like level of attractiveness.
Yeah, a lot of times I think when I'm thinking like sexy and like talking with men, I'm thinking about basically like kind of all the blown up secondary sexual characteristics that we're attracted to. So like big ass, big tits, big lips, like whatever is like really viewed as like highly sexual and sexy versus attractive would be conventionally pretty, right? So for example, like I would say I'm on some level conventionally attractive, but I don't have super high sexy scale because I don't have like any level of like high curvaceousness, right? So I'm wondering if you've got a really, really curvaceous, highly sexy woman versus somebody who's really attractive. Her face is beautiful, stunning. She's very conventionally pretty. Which are you selecting for?
Oh yeah, I was looking at it totally differently. So I would say that that's kind of I don't know if that's a good paradigm because like some guys would find you the guys are into different stuff. Some guys
I'm just trying to
actually
figure out for you. I want to make sure that I do my job of really understanding your position. Um, yeah.
okay, so yeah, so when I use the word attractiveness, I mean what I personally find hot, right? And I personally actually prefer like the big titty, big booty girls. I have a lot of friends who prefer like more like your type of girls, right? Like more like conventionally like I don't know, like slender and type of girl, right? And they would find you way more attractive than you would find the kind of girl I find attractive. Guys have different types. When I use the word sexy, I don't mean her like physical attractiveness. I mean more of like how she moves, how she like carries herself, how seductive she is. So that's kind of what's going with it. Sexy. But yeah, for me personally, I prefer like the porn star looking girls, right? So for me, they're always going to be more attractive, but they're not necessarily going to be more sexy. A girl who's slender could move better and be more flirty and be more, like sexual and have more sexual tension, right? So that's kind of. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding you. Like you're basically outlining that like what you find attractive varies, and so like what I was understanding as sexy is to you what is also attract. Like you're kind of saying these two things are the same thing in my mind. Is that correct?
Yeah,
because
like
I'm attracted to what you've listed as like sexy.
yeah, like I know I have a bunch of friends who like let's just take like you and I don't know like what's her name, Kim Kardashian, right? Totally different body types. I have a bunch of friends who are going to find you more attractive than Kim Kardashian. They're going to be like, no, like I don't like this fake booty look. I like this, like this natural Kyla look. She looks like a natural, wholesome girl. That's much more I'm attracted to. But like me personally, I actually do like the fake big booty look. So I'm going to be like, like oh yeah, I prefer like the big booty type of thing. So, but that they're both still fall into the attractive category. That's both attractiveness, but different guys find different things attractive. Not every guy finds that like porn star big booty look attractive. Like, believe me, I thought it was like pretty much every guy, but I have so many clients who are like, dude, I'm not into the same type of girls you are. Like, I like more of like the, like the slender, like type of traditional pretty look, type of look.
Okay. So in your mind, are there characteristics of somebody that can be disproportionately sexy versus attractive, right? So like you're talking about big booty, big hips, but you can probably say that somebody's attractive versus sexy. Like when I'm trying to create these two separate paradigms, can they exist for you? We would say like, yeah, these certain characteristics are what makes somebody really, really sexy to me. But these are things that I would say like, yeah, they're attractive, but not as sexy. Otherwise we can't engage with the paradigm that I'm making.
I think there's a correlation, but I do think you can have a girl who's like I don't know, like a 9 or 10 in terms of attractiveness. Like if you look at a picture of her or a video of her, you're like, this chick is perfect. But then when you interact with her, her sexiness might be like a 6 or 7 because maybe she's like really innocent and nervous, right? There's nothing attractive about someone who's really awkward and nervous, right? Conversely, you can have a girl who's like a 7 in terms of attractiveness, but maybe she's a 9 in terms of sexiness. Where you look at a photo of her, you're like, yeah, she's cute, but she's nothing special. But then you see the way she moves and she knows how to turn you on, right? She knows how to flirt, she knows how to hold tension, and then her sexiness goes up. I don't think you can have a girl who's a 1 in terms of attractiveness and 10 in terms of sexiness. I don't think it can be that much. I think there's a correlation, but yeah, it can like kind of vary based on how the girl behaves and how the girl carries herself. Like attractiveness is how what would you rate that girl if you were just looking at a photo or video of her? Sexiness is more of like you can't really rate sexiness until you start interacting with a girl and you see how she carries herself.
Right. Okay. And so for you, what you're saying is like if you're creating some level of separation, right? Because attractive is what I would argue like a little bit maybe more socially conventionally viewed as beauty. You're saying that you would prefer somebody that you view as sexy over somebody who's maybe very conventionally attractive.
Well,
Somebody with really, really high curves, right? You can understand that somebody can have crazy, crazy curvaceous curves and all that sort of stuff that you're finding very sexy, but be less attractive than somebody else. I'm not saying that they're not correlated. I'm just, can you imagine looking at a girl as basically like more sexual just in nature, but don't find her as attractive versus a girl that you have a hard time viewing as a sex object, but you do perceive her as being like beautiful, for example. Can you imagine this type of person?
yeah, it would just kind of be flipped. So I could definitely see a girl who's like, I find her very visually attractive, but then she's just like super awkward, so she's not that sexy for me. And I could see a girl who's like somewhat like, like average attractiveness, but I actually find her sexy because she knows how to move and carry herself in a very sexy way. Conventional beauty standards like 100% irrelevant to me. Like I don't care about like what the average person finds attractive. It's purely like what turns me on.
Okay. Okay. Maybe I should try this from a different angle then.
Yeah, I think we're kind of I don't know. Maybe I'm not explaining myself clearly, but I think we're kind of using the definition of attractiveness differently and sexy. That's where
Yeah, because I'm trying to tie this back to essentially the idea of status, status around sex, and this piece of basically you're saying like because they're physically attractive, even if they're not as good at sex, sex is so mental for me, and it's like, well, if it's mental, then why do you care about a physical characteristic necessarily, right? Like these two things don't map on very well for me.
Okay, because a physical characteristic will turn you on, right? So I get turned on by like big boobs and a big ass, right? So that's like a running joke with my friends. It's like if a girl has a really nice ass, Alex will be able to overlook like anything, right? That's like a running joke amongst my friends, and there's probably a little bit of validity to it, in all honesty. But yeah, like so. It's just like what turns you on, right? So that's why attractiveness will be important because it will turn you on, it will make you really horny, and that's what's going to make the sex like really, really hot for you.
Yeah. See, this is the issue, right? Is you're basically saying it's going to be really hot for me because I'm really physically attracted to her. But I'm telling you, the orgasm is going to be better with the less attractive person. It is guaranteed. I've waved a wand. It is guaranteed you're going to walk away from the sex with the average person being like, that was the greatest sex I've ever had in my life. Whereas if you have sex with the attractive woman, you're going to be walking away and being like, it was okay, but she was super hot. I'm asking you what you're preferring.
Oh, okay. Well, the only way the first one could take place is if I'm really, really turned on by the girl. So we're saying that I'm really, really turned on by the average girl.
The sex is amazing.
But in order for the sex to be amazing, I have to be really turned on by her.
You have enough of a boner that you can get in and start having sex, and the sex is amazing.
Right. But what I'm trying to get at is I'm not trying to like.
You can't convince me that if she's averagely attractive that you wouldn't be able to get up, though, right?
No, no. I mean, I could.
I'm not meaning that in a denigrating way. Sorry, I know that people say that. I'm not meaning that. I'm saying like I'm sure that even if she's averagely attractive, you could get turned on.
Right. I could do my duty. Yes, but like I will not be as like if I will not be if I'm yes I could get a boner and I could physically fuck her, and I've done that in the past when I was like whatever just trying to bust a nut, but I'm not going to be super turned on by her, right? It'll just be more like going through the motions, right? And
but I'm telling you, once she gets going, it's the most mind-blowing fucking. She does something crazy with her fingers. She tickles your scrotum just the right way, and it is the most mind-blowing sex you've ever had.
What I'm
because
saying,
you're saying is viewing her as sexy is what gives you sexual fuel. And so I'm asking, how is that not because of status? I don't understand.
Well, what I'm telling you is that the only way that the sex could be mind blowing for me is if I'm really physically attracted to her. There is no way the sex could be mind blowing for me. I don't care how good her techniques is. And I've had sex with like porn stars and stuff like that. So like I know what like good technique is, but if I'm not really attracted to the girl, that sex, even I don't care if she has 11 out of 10 technique, that sex is still not going to be like mind blowing for me. It's going to be just pretty decent. So assuming that the average girl can get me really, really turned on, like let's say she has some kind of a chip that she can put in my brain that just makes me super turned on by her, or for whatever reason, then yes, I would rather pick that girl. But though I'm just telling you for myself, the only way that can happen is if the girl can really, really turn me on. And that cannot be done physically alone. That cannot be done through technique, through any kind of special blowjob techniques. The only way that can be done is if I'm genuinely physically very much attracted to her. Like when I look at her, I'm like, when I see her
what you take in with your eyes is what makes you super into it. What you visually see is part of what makes you super, super into the sex. Am I understanding correctly?
That's a huge part of the picture. It's not the only thing, but that is a huge part of the picture. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I understand.
Meaning like when she takes her clothes off, I see her and I'm like, oh my fucking God. That's the kind of reaction that the girl needs to get from me in order for the sex for me to be like amazing, where I'm like, oh my fucking God, like, hang on, let me just admire your body for 20 seconds before we even do anything. That's how turned on I am by you.
Right. And so this isn't because you viewers like you've acquired, it's not like you look at this and you're like, oh my God, look at what I've been able to have sex with. It's, oh my God, she's just so attractive and I find that very sexy. And now I just want to fuck.
Exactly.
Correct? It's the latter.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I used to be like 8, 9 years ago, I used to be kind of it used to be a little bit of both, but for like last 5, 6 years, like that has completely worn off. Like you just, once you've done something so many times, the validation like stops coming because you've already done it. It's like the first time. Let's think about it like this, right? I'll give you a good analogy. Like the first million you make, it can be very like validating because you're like, fuck yeah, I'm a millionaire. But if you have $100 million and you make 1 more million, the validation is just like God. Like you,
yeah,
like,
it's the same.
What's an extra million, right? $1 million is a lot of money, but it's not going to do anything for your ego anymore because you already have 100 million. It's kind of the same thing that happens, I think, with most guys with sex is that like if you slept with a lot of girls, it's just like there's no way your brain could get that validation high because it's already happened so many times and that high wears off, right? And then you need a new high. So that's why I was saying that the only way I think you would be correct in that it's a validation is if it's a celebrity. Like I think if I hooked up with like Kim Kardashian or like Cameron Diaz or something like that, a high like an A-list celebrity, I think I would get a massive validation high. So I will fully acknowledge that would happen with celebrity. I just don't think it's going to happen, or I know it's not going to happen because I've had sex with very attractive girls, and that validation high just hasn't popped up for me in a while.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you first were starting to have sex, the validation piece was definitely a part of that. And now that basically you're like, I've done my sprints, this isn't my first rodeo. That's not really the piece that matters to you anymore. It's the sex essentially itself, and the attractiveness that you have to her, and all of that.
Correct.
I'd be curious, just to make sure I think I'm fully understanding you, but I want to make sure like fully.
Okay.
If you had sex with somebody and you thought that she was super attractive, amazing, but you had drank a lot and you had amazing sex, you enjoyed it a ton, and then the next morning you wake up and you realize she is significantly less attractive than you thought, would you look back and value that sex less, or would you be like, nah, it was still a good time?
That's an interesting question. Let me preface it by saying, like, I haven't been drunk in like over 5 years, so I'm having a hard time imagining that. But
It's a
like
hypothetical. It's a
yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not real. Yeah.
that is like a running joke in a lot of like male movies. Like, I don't know if you ever saw Beer Fest. You ever see Beer Fest?
I haven't, but I'm pulling this idea from common culture.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a common thing. I was drunk. I thought the girl was really hot. I had sex with her. Wake up next morning. I realized she's not that hot. Would I value the experience less? Potentially. Maybe I would start backwards rationalizing that my experience wasn't as good as I made it out to be. Yeah, I could see that going both ways, meaning like a girl has sex with a guy and she thinks it's a really good experience. And then the next day she finds out that he's like a loser who lives with his parents. And then she's like, I didn't even really want to fuck him when like the night before she really did. So backwards rationalization is a real thing. I don't think I'm immune to it. Yeah, I think there might be some level of backwards rationalization that could go on in my mind as well.
Okay, so you would essentially value. I want to make sure I'm understanding. You might value the sex a little bit less afterwards when you wake up and you realize, oh, she's significantly less attractive than I thought,
Well,
even though the sex was great.
what I'm saying is I think I would start backwards rationalizing that maybe I was wrong, because when I wake up in the morning next to her, I look at her and she doesn't turn me on, versus my memory, right? That's why my memory is so flawed. My memory of last night was that she really turned me on. Then I wake up, I realize that she doesn't turn me on, and that starts backwards rationalizing that maybe my memory of the event wasn't accurate.
Okay. Interesting.
It's like I have new information in front of me, and now I'm reconsidering the information I thought I was convinced about.
Okay. Interesting.
And I think that's a sword that cuts two ways. I think that like that happens to women all the time too.
Yeah, that for sure. I'm not trying to like basically like pin you and all of men.
No.
We're only talking about men right now specifically because that's our topic. But I don't want to act like anything. So you'd potentially backwards rationalize after the fact. Yeah. Even though you remember thinking, this is amazing, I'm so attracted to her, and I'm really enjoying this sex. Afterwards, you'd kind of backwards rationalize and basically say, maybe it wasn't that good.
Yeah, exactly.
I just thought it was.
Because like my memory is that this girl really turned me on, but then I wake up next to her, and let's assume I was like super wasted, right? And I'm like, oh, this girl doesn't really turn me on that much. And then I start reflecting on my memory. I'm like, maybe I have an incorrect recollection of events. Maybe she didn't really turn me on that much, because she doesn't turn me on that much now. So why would she turn me on so much the night before?
I guess if the observation of the thing, right, in that moment, you said when she drops her clothes and I'm like, oh fuck yes, right? Sexual fuel fills your body. You go a little like I picture like Goku in Dragon Ball Z, right? You get really fucking pumped because she's so hot. And you have great sex because you're so attracted and it's fucking based. And then the next morning you wake up and you were like, I was so wrong. I don't understand why that would matter, because who cares what the reality is? If your perception in that moment was that she was attractive and it led to you having great sex, you already had the great sex because in the moment you viewed her as hot. I don't understand why you would backwards rationalize now being like, well, maybe the sex wasn't actually that great just because she's not attractive now. Like, why does this matter when looking at her is the only purpose of having her being attractive is to give you sexual fuel? Why would it matter the next morning, especially if you're not planning to have sex? Nobody can take away the fact that you had great sex and you found her attractive in that moment.
Yeah, well, so let me explain that. So, because the moment is gone, right? So all you have is your memory of the recollection. Meaning, if you hit your head and that memory disappeared, like it's not like that experience is still there, right? That experience is in the past. So what I'm doing is I'm just questioning whether my recollection. I'm just questioning not the experience, but my memory of the experience whether it was accurate, right? And I think it would be natural for me to question my recollection if when I look at the girl, she doesn't turn me on anymore.
I guess, but why would it matter if the sex was great because in the moment you were attracted to them? Why would you afterwards try to like backwards justify
Oh
and
no, I would.
essentially
No, no, no.
like?
Yeah, I would. This one, none of this would be conscious. I wouldn't be sitting there like doing that. I'm just
No,
saying.
I'm aware, but I'm curious if the sex, if the visual, you said the reason why I want the attractive woman is because when they drop their clothes, it gives me sexual energy. And
Right.
that helps me have good sex. I'm like, I understand that. Okay, I believe you. Why would it matter what she looks like the next morning necessarily? The sex was still had and the sexual energy and feel was still there in that moment, even if it wasn't based in reality. Why would that matter at all?
It doesn't really matter. I would just question. It would be like natural for me to question my recollection of the experience if I put my mind to it. But it's kind of like if you. I mean, I think that's like kind of human nature. Like you, I'll try to give you like an analogy that'll make sense. You, I don't know. You see like, uh, you see like one of your friends that you haven't seen for a while, and they take their shirt off, and they're like assuming you're single or whatever, and or whatever. Maybe it's at like the beach or something like that, and they're like you just recall them being like super ripped. You're like, wow, you put on so much muscle, right? And then maybe like 2 weeks later, you're like surfing through Instagram and you see a recent shirtless photo of them and they don't look that jacked. You might at that point, it doesn't change your initial observation of them being jacked when you saw them 2 weeks ago, but you might question whether your memory is correct. Like, wait, I don't remember them. I thought they were way more muscular than this. Like they don't seem that muscular. Like, am I misremembering that
Mhm.
situation 2 weeks ago? It's the same thing here. It doesn't change the experience. You're just maybe questioning whether your recollection of the experience is correct because you now have conflicting data. So our human brains will always value things that we see in front of us in that moment compared to things that we remember, from the past, right? So it would be natural for you to question your recollection now that you're faced with conflicting evidence of the contrary.
Right. So you're being realistic, but I'm basically creating this hypothetical situation where essentially like a lot of times like when we were creating these hypotheticals, it's like to test our reasoning and logic, right? So
Right,
it
right.
doesn't really matter the realistic, right? It's like the trolley question, right? Where it's like you can't add like other realistic factors of being like, well, what do you mean? Which lever would I pull? I would just call the police, or like I would just tell the trolley driver to stop. And it's like that's not part of the hypothetical. We're just trying to test your actual thinking itself, right? And so we're kind of right now what you're it feels like you're I'm going to be honest, it feels like we're running away a little bit from the natural conclusion of the hypothetical, which is that essentially if the sex can be made worse post hoc, then it was never about the sex or just her physical appearance alone. It to some extent was something more than that, which is how it can relate to the outside world, how attractive she can be. There's some level of intrinsic validation, right? Because you're adding one variable, which is like, well, realistically, I would be questioning myself. And I'm like, well, in this hypothetical, you don't. You remember how attractive you found her. You remember being drunk and thinking she's fucking hot and amazing. And the sex was great. And the morning you wake up and you're like, oh, interesting. I was actually wrong about how I saw her. The only reason that I can see, like the only natural conclusion as to why the morning after you would maybe feel like some regret or some of like buyer's remorse or kind of just like, meh, is because it's not just the sex and the physical appearance that matters the most. There's some piece of validation or status that has to come with the sex that makes the sex so valuable. That's why when you realize she's less attractive, you value the sex a little bit less.
Okay, let me kind of explain that. So I think we have to separate the event from your recollection of event. Meaning the event could be a 10 out of 10 in the moment, but then your recollection of the event could be like a 7 out of 10, right? For
It's
whatever
not,
reason.
that's not happening. Your recollection is perfect. You have
Oh, my
perfect
recollection of.
recollection. It's 10 out of 10.
Oh, okay.
Everything. You perfectly recollect. You just, when you're looking at her, you realize, oh, she is not a 10. She is a 7 or a
Okay,
6 or a
okay.
5,
My
whatever you want to
recollection is perfect. Okay, so
put. Mhm.
then that would kind of remove the alcohol component of the analogy, right? Because alcohol fucks with our recollection.
Well,
Um,
in hypotheticals, I'm the magic fairy. I can do whatever I want with the
okay, so the
hypotheticals.
alcohol fucks you up, but doesn't fuck up your recollection. Okay. Um, I would say the only way that could happen, which could happen if there's a big difference. So meaning if like you remember the girl, okay, let's assume you have perfect recollection. The girl's like a 10 in your memory, but she's an 8 in real life. That would have no effect. The only way it can have an effect is if there's something about the girl that turns you off or disgusts you. Meaning I don't know, like let's say, okay, let's do a very crude analogy. You have sex with this hot girl, right? And it's like really, really good, and then the next day that hot chick tells you that she's actually a tranny, right? Now you're like, like whatever, like just keep it real. You're probably a little disgusted, right? And that could affect your current perception because there's something about her that disgusts you. That's a very extreme example, right? That's like, you thought she was a dude, she was a girl, she became a dude. But like on a more, I guess, reasonable, like it could be maybe you thought that she was like in very good shape, right? Maybe you guys had sex with your clothes on. Okay, let's just do it like this. You have a lot of sexual chemistry. You have sex with your clothes on. She looks good. But then you wake up the next morning and you guys are naked and you just see like a lot of flab on her body. Maybe like she has like these disgusting like spots, right? I've actually even encountered that once. She has these like big black dots and you're looking at her body and you're like, ugh, like I'm really turned off, right? You're like physically turned off in that moment. So that's going to affect how much you value the experience, which has nothing to do with validation. It just has to do with like disgust, the feeling of disgust that you're getting based on part of the girl.
Okay. I'm not sure if I fully believe you, but I feel like we've run to the end of this hypothetical.
Let me
I'm just going to open my window, but I can hear you, so.
Go ahead. I'll deflate it too. Okay, so let me give you an analogy, right? You would agree with me that for you, sex is not about validation. Like when you were single, right? Was it about validation for you? Or?
That's going to be a really hard question to answer because my sexual life and journey is going to be extremely atypical. I have only had sex with one partner.
Oh.
I had some pretty significant major trauma when I was younger. So like the idea of just having sex casually at all was a giant no-go for me at all.
Okay.
So like I'm not the best one to map onto like more general casual dating experiences.
Okay,
so I can picture a casual dating experience, but I'll just be honest, it's not going to be me.
Okay, fair enough. I'll rephrase the question. Let's say, okay, let's go back to when you were single, right? And you go on a date with a guy, you guys really click, you find him really attractive, like he's like, I don't know, like a younger Brad Pitt or whoever is like a perfect 10 for you, but also his personality is great. Like he just seems like the perfect guy for you, right? Like everything is perfect. You're so turned on by this guy. You go home with him. Maybe there's a little alcohol involved. You guys have sex. The sex is amazing, right? Like everything is perfect. You wake up the next morning and then you realize that this guy is actually like, you're actually in his basement. His parents are upstairs and then there's a bunch of syringes laying around and this guy's a heroin addict and he also kicks his dog. Because you see him wake up in the morning, he kicks his dog, right? You've just been flooded. Your brain has just been flooded with waves of disgust. You're disgusted by the fact that you hooked up with a guy who's a loser, even though you thought he was this perfect guy. You're turned off by the fact this guy's cruel and beats animals, and you're turned off by the fact that he's like a heroin addict, right? And now you're also worried about whether you have an STD, right? So even though there's no element of validation for you didn't have sex with this guy to try to get some kind of validation. You had sex with this guy because you thought he was the perfect guy, like on every level. But then you have new information the next morning that he's far from a perfect guy. He's actually a guy that you would never have sex with. When you question your recollection of events, even if you thought the sex was a 10 out of 10 in the moment, that next morning, you might question that because like, ew, this guy's a heroin addict. I don't fuck heroin addicts. Ew, this guy beats his dog. I don't have sex with like people who are cruel to animals. And he lives in his parents' basement. Like, ew, I don't have sex with losers. Like when you start questioning your recollection of the experience.
To be honest, again, if we're giving the hypothetical that I gave where it's like, I fully recollect it. No, I would basically just go, oh, the date was good and the sex was awesome, but this is not somebody I would ever want to have a future relationship with. And that would be completely a one-off.
You don't think you would question your recollection of events at all?
Not. We're creating in the hypothetical where I'm not, like, I can fully recall things, right? So, like, no. I would assume, oh, it's fucking weird. It was really good sex with somebody I never want to see again. That's fucking weird. And then I would get out of there. Yeah.
You might be, I mean, I can't rule out the fact that you're like very unique maybe in that way, but I think a lot of people would start questioning based on this new conflict information they have, their recollection of the experience. I do think a lot of people would start doing that because they're like, now they have such conflicting data, right? And it's like your mind is like so confused because your
I'd
memory.
question my taste in men for sure. I'd be like, what the fuck? What flags did I miss? For sure. I would be questioning that. But remember, in the hypothetical I gave you, like it was just a one off. So, like in this hypothetical, I would definitely be questioning my taste in men. Like I would be like, what fucking flags did I miss? Like, how did I not see this? Right. But I don't know if I would be questioning the quality of the date. Like I would be like, what the fuck? How do I enjoy a date so much with somebody that I would never want to be in a partnership or relationship with, or fuck, theoretically?
Well, you don't think you would also question your recollection of the experience? Like maybe this sex that I thought was a 10 out of 10 was not a 10 out of 10. And maybe I was just like,
Not
kind of,
really.
okay.
I would mostly wonder how I missed all of these red flags.
Okay, so you would, but then if you're wondering how you missed all these red flags, then maybe you're questioning at the very least your recollection of the date. Maybe you're like, oh, there was some red flags on the date that I just didn't pick up on because I was so into the moment.
Yeah, or maybe I'd be like, oh gosh, am I attracted to like dirtbags who abuse their pets and like live with their parents? Like, did I overlook flags, or am I like being attracted to the wrong things? For example, like there's lots of issues of like women being attracted to like really negative traits, and I would probably be like, oh fuck, that's a problem. That's really weird.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you're like questioning your recollection of the date, like, hey, did I miss these red flags? Was there like an elephant in the room on the date that I missed? Right. In the moment, I remember the date being really well, but maybe there's something that I missed. I think if you can question your recollection of the date, then I think logically follows that you might question your recollection of the sex.
Uh Theoretically, yeah. I would probably be questioning my senses though, like not reality necessarily itself. Like I wouldn't be questioning basically like was the sex good? I would basically be like, how the fuck did I enjoy the sex? That would be more so what I'd be questioning.
Right. Exactly. You're questioning how the fuck was I able to get turned on by that, right? Which there's no way you could start questioning that
But I
without.
wouldn't say I didn't get turned on by it. That's the issue, right? I wouldn't be like I must have just been less turned on than I thought I was. I'd be like,
No.
no, I
Okay.
was. I just don't know why.
Right. But you
And I still
also.
did enjoy the sex, so I'd be kind of fucked in the head over that. I'd be like, fuck, I enjoyed sex with like a dog abusing neat, basically. Like that would be really strange.
Right. You would still acknowledge that you enjoyed the sex, but maybe you would question then instead of the sex being a 10 out of 10, maybe you might now start thinking that maybe it was like an 8 or 9 out of 10. Like maybe you would just start slightly questioning.
I think
Or
most maybe this is a woman thing. I feel like most people would be wondering why they were turned on by it. Like I'd be like, why the fuck did I find that attractive? What the fuck?
that's certainly part of it. Yeah, for sure. Then I think that would happen with men too. But I think there would be more to it. I think you might also start because now you have such conflicting data. You might start also questioning your version of reality, right? Because reality is like subjective, right? We interpret it through our senses.
Mhm.
So two people could like I've seen this happen so many times. Two people have some kind of altercation, and their versions of reality are like radically different, and they're both honest people who you think are both telling the truth, and you're like, what the fuck, like did this happen or this happen? These are two totally different things, right? Well, it's not that neither one of them is lying to you, it's just their recollection of reality is different because they're interpreting through their brain, right? It's the same thing, right? Like we're all doing that. That's like human nature. We interpret everything through our senses. So if we're given conflicting data the next day that's definitively in front of your eyes, that you can't question if you're seeing something directly, right? You can start questioning whether my dog was on the couch yesterday, but I can't really question that my dog is on the couch right. Wait, is he? Oh, yeah, that my dog is on the couch right now. Like oh fuck.
You're good.
Wait, hang on. This thing just popped off. Hold up a second. But yeah, what I'm saying is I can't like really question whether my dog is on the couch. Wait, let me just get this going.
Yeah. So I think the main difference between our hypotheticals, though, is that like reality isn't subjective. Your perception of reality is what's subjective. So in the hypothetical I gave you, I told you that the objective reality is that you enjoyed the date and the sex. And when you wake up, you realize that they're not somebody that you'd be attracted to, right? Like all three of these things in the hypothetical are objective reality. What would be the effect, right? My effect would be I would be questioning myself as to how the fuck I enjoyed sex with somebody who I would not ever be attracted to. And I'd basically like, in this case, I'd basically be like, man, the sex was a 10, but maybe I'm just like another Stacy. Like I'm just one of the people that like incels complain about all the time of like, I just want to fuck people who are like really toxic and really like terrible. I wouldn't, if I start basically like questioning whether I enjoyed it, when I've had this objective reality that I did, now I'm just doing self-delusion. Like I don't know why I would do that. Why would I like be like, maybe I didn't enjoy the sex. And it's like, or I did enjoy the sex because that's the objective I was given, the objective reality. And something else is going off. Like my taste is wrong. Maybe I thought my taste was this. Turns out my taste isn't that. I said I would never date a heroin, drug addict, dog abusing person. Turns out I'll at least have sex with them. That's something to think about.
Rhaegar didn't like that. He just walked away from the couch. He's like, fuck you. No, I mean, like, yeah, but I guess the only thing I would say is like, you don't really know what the objective reality is. It's just like your memory of
I
the
gave
reality.
it to you in the hypothetical though, but yeah.
Okay, so maybe then I'm not understanding this correctly. So
It's
you
okay.
know, so
do
like,
you want to loop on the on the hypothetical? We
I
can.
mean, we can move on if you want. No, I was like,
I'm good. I just don't want you to feel like dragged in a circle by me, like over.
No,
and
no,
over.
you're
Because
good.
I'm
No,
not. I'm not
I'm
trying to have like a crazy gotcha or anything. Like I don't want anyone on your side to feel like I'm trying to like got him. I'm basically just being like, it doesn't. Maybe you're not understanding my hypothetical. I don't think your answer actually matches the hypothetical based on like what you're claiming, because you're claiming it's not about status, it's just about the sex, and then your answer was essentially, to some extent, in my view, would indicate some level of status matters. I'm like, well, those don't make sense. But yeah.
Okay, I guess like what I'm having a hard time imagining is that like the objective reality, because that's like, I guess like the only way that could happen. Okay, maybe you have like a
Just
video.
pretend. Just
You have like, well, that's
you're
like
in a
saying,
video game.
that's sort of like saying pretend like Alex, pretend like your dog can talk. Like it's like one of those things that's really hard to imagine because it's like not based. I guess the only way that could happen if there's like a videotape or something of the event, so you're like watching it back, so you can see what happened. Even that is only limited to visual, doesn't give you like how your mindset. But let's say they have some kind of new technology that allows you to relive the experience. So it's not just a video. You can have like you can actually like you plug it into your like fucking arm and you can like be in that moment, right? That's like the only way I guess that could work. So if I could go back and re-experience the reality for sure, and that it was a 10 out of 10, then no, I would not question. If that was the case, that's the only way that could happen, then I would not question my recollection of reality, because I've just been I have just confirmed that my memory was correct, right? But aside from having this machine that you can plug into and re-experience that moment through like some kind of enhanced videotape that allows you to feel through the senses, I don't know how you would be so confident in your reality. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, I can think of like tons of like, for example, you sleep with somebody and you're like, damn, this chick is so hot, guys. And all your friends are like, no, she's not. And you're like, nah, she's a 10 out of 10, man. Hottest woman I've ever seen. Right. And like in that way, like you would basically like, but yeah, we can move on. It's okay.
I mean, I certainly hope they invent that machine one day, because that'll be pretty fucking epic.
That is true.
Yeah. Where do you think we should go from here?
I took notes on some of the stuff. We can maybe talk about what do you think is most important for men in like dating with women and stuff like that? Like, what do you think are the obstacles men face? And yeah, what are the biggest obstacles that men face? Maybe we'll start there.
It's a good question. I think there's definitely a lot. We're just assuming men in America, so let's just take like men in major U.S. cities. I think there's a lot. I think that first of all is a lack of knowledge and understanding. I think a lot of guys don't really understand female psychology and female attraction, and a lot of the stuff they go off is either stuff they saw in like movies like Hitch, which are just like totally not realistic of reality and how the dating marketplace works. Or they're going off stuff they maybe read on the internet from YouTubers who are like me, but not me, who give bad information. Maybe they're going off like some hardcore, like black pill type of YouTuber, or like some like SJW feminist type of YouTuber when it comes to dating advice. And they're just operating on incorrect assumptions, incorrect information. I see that all the time with my clients. They just have incorrect information and they come to incorrect conclusions. Like they'll be like, I think I'm too ugly for dating apps. That's their conclusion. And we'll look at their photos and their photos just suck. It's all like car selfies. I'm like, well, the problem isn't you're too ugly. It's just that your photos suck too much, but they're convinced that they're too ugly, right? So that happens all the time with men. They just come to all these incorrect conclusions. So I think that's one of that, having incorrect knowledge. I think number two is also getting past like the barrier to entry, basically. There's like a saying that like like the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. I think it's like the same thing when it comes to getting laid. The guys who are at the very top are getting laid now more than ever, and that leaves a lot less for the bottom. And that's like kind of supported by data, like the fact that incels are on the rise every year, blah blah blah, stuff like that. So there's a lot of data that supports stuff like that. And so I think a lot of guys are like not able to like meet the minimum threshold to have like a tangible level of dating success, and they just get discouraged and they like voluntarily quit from the dating marketplace. It's like you're applying for jobs and maybe your resume sucks and you get like, I don't know, you get like you flunk like 5 interviews and then you just withdraw from the marketplace because you think that you're unemployable. But maybe it's just like you don't meet the minimum threshold nowadays for that industry to get hired by a job, and that's why you're getting these repeated failures. So I think that's another one. I'll try to do one more. I think the third one is a lot of guys are also not really looking in the right places, and they're not playing the game well. So like a lot of guys are, for example, going to like fancy clubs, trying to like pick up girls there, which is a notoriously terrible venue unless you like have a table and you're whatever. Like a much better place would be like a lounge or a dive bar, right, for that average guy. So I think guys are looking in the wrong places. If they're on Tinder, maybe they're not using good photos, right? Or they're not like, they're not getting enough volume in. So yeah, stuff like that, I think, would be the third one. I mean, there's a whole bunch more, but those are 3 quick ones. I can keep going if you want, but yeah, like those are just like 3 ones I think we can start off with.
Sure. I'd be curious. Do you think that men are in a worse position when it comes to dating now than they were even like 20 years ago? Like, do you think things are getting more difficult for men in dating, or is it the same?
I think for most guys, I think I'll explain like this. I don't think there's a super simple answer. I think for 1% of guys, it's getting way better. I think for 60-70% of guys, it's gotten worse. And I think for like 20% of guys, it stayed the same.
Okay. Maybe help me understand, what is the 1% that it's gotten way better, and the 60, maybe do the 160 and then the 19%.
Yeah. And by the way, these numbers are kind of like pulled out of my ass. Like this.
Yeah,
these are
no, don't worry.
Okay.
So what's the small percentage where it's getting better?
The guys who are at the very top of the game, meaning we're talking about like popular influencers, basketball players, guys who are like popular promoters in the area. It can be. It's not just famous guys. There's other guys that might like really charismatic, charming, good-looking fuckboys. I think for a certain percentage of guys, it's easier than it's ever been, and they're like they have more girls than they know what to do with, right? And they're like, "What are you talking about? It's difficult, man. It's never been easier for me, right?" And that's because technology has changed the game. Like, think of it as like this is going to sound crude, but think of like pussy as a finite resource. There's only so many girls, right? And girls are, not going to have sex like most girls are not going to have sex like back to back, back to back, back to back. Like, let's just say, for example, the average girl wants to have sex with a new guy once a week. Like, let's just try to be very crude. So if the guys at the very top are getting more, that leaves less for the guys at the bottom, right? I think technology has enabled the shift so that it's more going towards the top. It's the same thing that's happened with money making. So I think that's who the top 1% is. It might even be top 0.2% or something.
I won't hold you to your math, I promise. I just want to understand the groups themselves.
Yeah. The bottom 60% is like the average guy. That's like the average guy. He's average looking, average social skills, average lifestyle. Maybe he works a 9-to-5 job, makes $40,000 a year. For that guy, I think it's gotten harder. And then like the 20% or whatever are like the above average guys who are not in like I would be in that 20%. I don't think for me it's like harder or easier than it's been, right? But I'm not the average guy. Like in a lot of ways, I'm above the average guy, but I don't think I'm like part of that 0.1% yet. Like I would be disgenuine if I was said I'm in that category. So they would be like kind of like guys like me who are pretty charming, charismatic. They have good social skills, good game, decent lifestyle, but they're not like famous. They're not like ultra fuck boys. They're not like ultra good looking.
Okay, interesting. I'd be super curious then. I know I'm just like mostly just asking you and not responding.
No,
what do you think about Andrew Tate?
That's funny. I was actually watching a podcast with him as I was driving over home for this podcast. Yeah. I have mixed feelings about Andrew Tate. I I mean, I like him as a person. I somewhat know him personally. Like me and him chat from time to time. So I like him as a person. I'll preface my answer with that. I think he's a nice guy. I think he means well, and I think he's like a respectable human being. In terms of his views, which is the side that pretty much everyone sees because most people don't know him personally, some things he says I agree with, and some things I disagree with. Like one thing that I was listening to actually, as he was talking, I was thinking like I disagree with this. He was saying guys value purity and innocence above all else, and he was like saying like if you have a choice, like if a guy has a choice between for a one night stand between having a sex with a girl who has a one body count and a girl who has 20 body count, they'll pick the girl with one body count. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, that totally does not apply to me. I would rather have sex with a girl who has more experience because one, she's going to be easier to sleep with. Two, she's going to be less clingy after sex. And three, the sex is probably going to be better. Right. So I'm like, I'm totally the opposite of that. Like there's some things that he says that I just like fundamentally disagree with. But there's also other things that I agree with. I mean, maybe you can like clarify what position. I'll tell you what my thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm actually interested to know that you know him and that you like him as a person, because I mostly view his social media as a character. I don't think he cares about pickup artistry at all. I think he cares about making money. And right now, Red Pill is a great way to lure a bunch of men in who have been disenfranchised. Because I would argue, for example, almost in all ways, it is worse for all men in the dating game overall. I think things are really, really difficult. I think expectations are exceedingly high and getting higher, and men are less and less equipped to actually meet those standards. They're less educated. They're typically parented not as well, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious about your experience with Andrew Tate as an individual, because I have some serious concerns about who he is as a person. Specifically, it feels to me like a lot of people look at Andrew Tate who hate him and they're like, he's the worst because he's a misogynistic piece of shit who treats women like objects and blah, 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 which based on what he says is true. The issue is that I think he's actually fucking over the men who are buying his stuff the most. I think he's selling them a pipe dream that they won't achieve with the pure goal of raking in as much money and getting as famous as possible for himself from these disenfranchised men. And he's doing it by just spouting off nonsense that they want to like hear and yes man. And it makes me really concerned. So why do you find him like a good person? Is he very different off of social media than he is in person?
Yeah, so let me kind of respond to each one of those things. And there's a lot of things you said that I actually kind of agree with. I just might phrase it a little differently. So I agree with you that Andrew Tate does not give a fuck about the pickup community or any of that. He actually has admitted that he thinks that date game, which means like approaching girls during the daytime, is for losers. So he doesn't give a fuck about pickup. 100% correct about that. In terms of whether he's a character, I agree with that partially. I do think he's definitely putting on a shtick. So I don't think he's pulling I don't think it's like completely disgenuine, meaning I think he just takes the opinions that he has and like 10x's them. But I don't think he's like taking opinions that he doesn't have. But I do think he definitely understands that being polarizing is really effective strategy for social media, and like it's working, right? Like he's going to do a lot better than me because I'm a lot less polarizing. My views are a lot more nuanced and balanced, and that's not as interesting. Like my views are just not as interesting. When I'm like, well, let me give you like 5 counterpoints. That's not as interesting as like, yo, these girls are hoes, right, or whatever. So yes, I do agree that he puts on a character. In terms of is he different, I'm not going to claim that I know him like really well or anything like that. We've just been like we have mutual friends and we've talked like offline. Yes, I do think he's a lot more grounded and chill. Like if you're like talking to him personally, than he is like when he's like on doing like videos for social media. I definitely think he puts on a bit of a shtick, and I think as a person he's a lot more enjoyable as a human being than he is as a character, or at least a lot more relatable and a lot more like just like a normal guy, like more or less like a guy to have a convo with, rather than this like extreme character. So yes, I do think of that. In terms of like trying to get as much money from men, well, I think it's also important to realize that he doesn't have any courses when it comes to like pick up. He's not a dating coach. As far as I understand, the one product he has 2 products. He has Hustlers University, which is largely focused on making money. I personally haven't gone through it, so I can't comment on whether it's effective or not. I've heard things from some people say it's actually a really good course, and some people say it's like very surface level. So I've heard mixed things on that. The second venture that he has is the War Room, which is like $3,000 or something like that. And I've heard fairly decent things about that, but also some mixed things. But as far as I understand, he doesn't have any, like, he's not a dating coach. He doesn't have any pickup content. That's not, he does talk about dating and pickup in the similar token that I talk about politics or fitness, but I'm not a politician. I'm not a fitness coach, right? Does that make sense?
Why do you think he's talking about dating and pickup now?
Oh, because I think he recognizes that there's a lot of views in that. Like it's I think he realizes a topic that a lot of people are going to click on. I think Andrew Tate is a very ruthless marketer, meaning he's just going to do. He's very pragmatic and he's going to do whatever works the best without really taking like ethical considerations into account. Where like maybe this is a disgenuine strategy. He's very pragmatic and he's very ruthless marketer. Versus, yeah. So I think he just simply recognizes the fact that that's what gets views.
Right. What do you think he's trying to do with the views, though? Like, what's the goal? Why get views?
It's an interesting question. I've thought about that because if you think about it, like Andrew Tate was already multimillionaire way before he even had like a YouTube channel or any of that, right? So he has like more than enough money to like live off for the rest of his life without doing Hustlers University, without having a YouTube channel, without doing any of that. So I'm kind of speculating right now, but I think that he I don't think it's just about the money for him. I think he actually wants like the challenge and the high of achieving a new like success in a new field. So he has already achieved like a lot of success when it comes to making money. But I think he now wants the fame and the clout, which he never really had. So I think that's probably what's motivating him. I think if it was just about the money, he would probably focus more on the business that he already had, which does not involve him being so public. Yeah, so my speculation, and again, I don't know this for a fact, is that he's now trying to achieve success in the field that he doesn't have success in, basically, which is cloud status, money. I mean, not money, cloud status, fame.
Do you think that by getting really popular and famous on the internet, it would drive more people to his Hustlers University?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. I just think that if his main goal was just making as much money as possible, like I don't think he would focus so heavily on the clout and the fame, even though it can lead to money. I think that time, because it takes a lot of time to make YouTube content. He has spent a lot of time like doing podcast content. It's a lot of time. Like I think that money, he already has a very successful business model, whether you think it's ethical or not. You know, we can't deny the fact that having a bunch of girls on OnlyFans and taking 50% of their money, it can make you a lot of money. Why not just like build on that, create an agency, like maybe create a porn company or something like that. Like that, you already have a vehicle, right? Why build a brand new vehicle when you can just like keep building on the vehicle that you already have? So it just seems like kind of illogical if his only goal is money to go into a completely different direction versus like he already has something successful. Why not just build on that? That's just kind of like my speculation.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at the Hustlers University and the amount of members that he has, I think he's averaging about $5.5 million a month from Hustlers alone, which is I think it's about 20 times more than his brother is claiming to make from just the webcam models alone.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right about that. I mean, I think maybe I'm projecting a little bit because I'm trying to like think of
I'm not trying to make you defend Andrew Tate by any means.
No,
I'm just
no,
curious.
I definitely have very mixed thoughts about him. Overall, I have a positive impression of him, but there's some things I'm fairly critical of him on. I mean, I'm just trying to think of like myself. Like, I'm definitely not nearly as rich as Andrew Tate. I'll clarify that, but you know, I'm pretty well off. And it's like at this point for me, money is like I don't get high for making money anymore. So if I double my income tomorrow, that's not actually going to do much for me, like in terms of my happiness, right? So at this point, I'm like more looking for like clout and status because I think that's going to give me a better high and better like feel good chemicals than just making more money. So I'm just like thinking for myself, like for me, because I'm already like top 1% in terms of finances. Do I care about being in the top 0.1%? Not really. I can already afford pretty much every single thing I want. So it's like I'm not saying like I don't want to make more money. I'm just saying it doesn't motivate me nearly as much as it did when I was broke and I was like I need to make more money. Like that motivated me. It doesn't really do that much anymore. And so I guess I'm applying my own mindset to him, thinking like, well, you've already reached that kind of that pinnacle. you're going to move on to the next thing. And a lot of like successful people, if you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like I read his autobiography like 20 times, he talks about once you reach like the peak of bodybuilding, you want to move on to the next thing because the bodybuilding thing, like, he's already at the top. So he moved on to movies. After that, he was already at the top. He moved on to politics, right? So I'm applying my logic and like the logic of other successful people to Tate, but maybe he's wired differently. Like maybe for him, the high of money never wears off. And there is a substantial difference in how his brain rewards him if he makes an extra $20 million. That is entirely possible.
Sorry, there's a loud truck driving by. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I know he's got a lot of money in Bitcoin. He's really exploded into social media around the same time that Bitcoin dropped almost 80%, which is really strange. But I would also agree with you that, yeah, once you hit the top levels of money, there's a lot of really rich people that have no clout. And there's something uniquely seductive about clout, which is very different than just having money. Money is some form of clout, but there's a lot of rich motherfuckers that nobody's ever heard of and nobody cares about. There's a difference to like walking down the street and having people looking at you and being like, you're, Alex from Playing with Fire, right? Which is really interesting.
Super validating for me. Yeah, I will fully admit I'm like low key addicted to clout. It's such a high for me. If I had a choice between doubling my income or doubling my cloud, I would 100% doubling my cloud.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah. But yeah, some people are wired differently. Like you're right. Some people don't actually give a shit about cloud. Like some of the richest people on the planet, they actually want to stay off the radar as much as possible. They like to be more low key because they feel like if they're in the spotlight, they can't actually make as much money. So maybe instead of making 100 million a year, they can only make 50 million a year. And they're like, no, I'd rather stay out of the spotlight so I can make a little bit more money. And it's like, okay, they want that. For them, the high of making money never wears off. For me, like that doesn't make sense because I think at a certain point it just becomes numbers on the screen, right? It's just like, oh, this is an extra zero on the screen. I can already afford everything I want. Like, do I really care about that zero? For me, the answer is no. But I think for some people, that would still be yes. And it is entirely possible that Andrew Tate could be one of them. So, yeah, I'll acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know he's not a pickup artist guy, but he's been really tracking because of his takes on men and women and dating, which is why he's kind of getting connected to the red pill movement overall, which is interesting because if you look at people like Andrew Tate or Sneeko, the red pill movement started with just dating and pickup artistry and like dating coaching. And now it's turned into an entire political, like populist movement as well, where it's like, it's not just I think Sneeko says it's not just the red pill on dating, it's the red pill on everything. And it seems like a lot of the same men who are interested in pickup artistry are also really aligning with all of these things. They're disenfranchised and disillusioned with dating and women, and they're frustrated and they hate the establishments and the institutions, and they don't trust their government. They believe that like there's no way to vote, and like there's nothing for them in this world, that they're just like pawns. And I guess I see Andrew Tate as somebody taking advantage of these people for money, and that makes me sad. And clout, actually, because a lot of his business modality is geared towards people making extra clips of him and then posting them. I know a lot of the War Room, the whole point of it is in part to like release more videos of him so they can make money, so they can get like a very, very popular TikTok, even though it's not him and stuff like that, which helps him with his clout game.
You are touching on something I've thought and discussed privately many times. You are right. There's definitely a correlation between the red pill community and alt-right. And it's flabbergasted me because I'm like, well, you can be super into pickup and red pill, but be a liberal, right? But like, I'm actually like, I would say that like just me personally, I'm definitely not alt-right, by the way. I'm like somewhere in the middle. On some things, I definitely lean towards the left. Some things I lean a little bit towards the right. But I'm an anomaly. Like,
yes, I would agree. Yeah,
I'm an anomaly for sure. It boggles my mind. I'm not the only one, but I am. We're a small percentage.
Do you think we need more of you though? Because when I listen to people like talking in these red pill areas, because it often seems like the way that you get the young men in first is to talk about girls, because that's like when you're 19 to 21 and you've like maybe never had sex or anything. That's a lot of your fixation is like, fuck girls. And somebody can say, well, get rich. And it's like, yeah, but I'm never going to get rich at 19. Like it's very difficult to achieve. But if I can get at picking up girls, then I can at least have like something, right? Which is why I'm so concerned about the ethics of the pickup artist area, and why I find you very interesting, because while like you and I have some differences on certain ethics and stuff. You don't have this like extremely aggressive, like women are Stacys and like dirty sluts if they have sex, and like you don't have this aggressive misogynistic bend, which often in a lot of movements sympathetic to men's issues, this like grows within them, which is very strange.
Yeah, well, I think we also have to separate the red pill community from the pickup community because they may seem similar to an outside, but they are quite different. In the pickup community, I mean, you might disagree with me on this, but you're that kind of at least blatant misogyny is really rare in the pickup community. In the red pill community is much more common, and the black pill community it is extremely common. So we do have to separate those communities, and they do kind of war with each other a lot. Like I know this may seem like really weird to an outsider because like isn't it all the same shit? But they do not get along. There's so much beef between red pillars and black pillars, or between pickup guys and red pill guys, even though there's a lot of overlap, which also kind of boggles my mind.
It's the same with communists. They're all infighting. The Marxists hate the Leninists. And I'm like, but all of your ideas are bad, you know?
Right. So I would definitely much closer identify with the pickup community, although I can articulate the positions of literally every single one of these communities because I've debated them extensively. I've wondered whether it's a correlation or causation thing when it comes to alt-right politics and the red pill community. Meaning, is it that just guys who are alt-right are more likely to become red pill, or is there something inherently about red pill ideologies when it comes to women that might push a person to become more alt-right, right? That's the question I don't really have a good answer to. My speculation is that it's probably a correlation thing. I just don't think there's anything about like red pill ideas on women that pushes you to alt-right politics. So I think there's some kind of correlation factor. I think that maybe guys who are like more liberal, right? They're just gonna maybe they have more shame around sex, or they think that like, oh, red pill is misogynistic or pickup is misogynistic, and they come to that conclusion. They dismiss that community. Versus a guy who's alt-right is like already more skeptical of like mainstream assumptions, and he's more likely to like go through the red pill community and give it a fair shot. So that would kind of be my theory, is that it's a correlation rather than a causation.
Have you ever heard of, she's a, I'm going to go super nerd on you for a second. Have you ever heard of a political theorist named Hannah Arendt?
No, I have not.
So she's was writing around like the 1919s, 1920s, and she has this idea of essentially, it's talking actually about a totalitarian regime, but it's really interesting for me with the psych background because I see it as a really good example of how groupthink in major societies and like large groups actually occur, and how this like pipeline idea actually occurs, right? When a lot of people on the left talk about a pipeline, they talk about some sort of like sometimes I talk about the pipeline in the way that I would, which is like more of this passive progression to more extremism and kind of fanaticism. And then others on the left talk about the pipeline, it's like this intentional thing, and Joe Rogan's like talking with like Nick Fuentes, and they're like, hey guys, I'm gonna like drop this, are you gonna say a similar thing later, and I'll like make sure that my videos are, and then it's like this conspiracy. I don't think that that's happening. But Hannah Arendt basically views ideas like an onion. And so what happens in groups that get insulated, and people won't engage with them because, well, I would say you probably would maybe agree to some extent, a lot of times the left won't engage with pickup artists or red pills or black pills because they're misogynistic pieces of shit, which to some extent is varying levels of true. The issue is that by not engaging with them, it itself becomes insular, and you become insular, and now no good ideas are happening. And so Hannah Arendt basically views it as like an onion. And so like pickup artists might be like kind of on the outside of the onion. So they're the least extreme of the position. They're the most reasonable. And when they talk about things, they're going to be much more reasonable and balanced. The issue is that if you go like one step in, right, now you're less extreme than those behind you in the onion, and you're a little bit more extreme than those ahead of you, but all of you are actually working within the same landscape and assumptions about the world. The dating game is rigged. You know, women have it out for men to some extent, which I know that you wouldn't agree with necessarily, but essentially the dating game is rigged. It's all on men. They have to just figure their shit out, and like there are certain amounts of insurmountable problems and stuff like that. And the issue is that as you go in through the onion, ideas get more extreme, but the core idea of the onion never gets challenged, right? Of being like, maybe your landscape landscape's wrong. And all you hear around you is more or less extreme versions of your own opinion. And so then we get shocked of being like, how do these people not go anywhere else? And that's why, like, when I see red pillars and black pillars also gravitating towards like really weird tradcons views and like talking about women who like work on like as cam girls as like dirty used up sluts and like really horrible words that I've like heard talked about women. And they also hate the institution. It's like these things all lumped together because for whatever reason there's like this element of basically like insular onioning. And so it's like all of the ideas that basically have been castigated out of the social conversation that isn't allowed in the social milieu. We're not allowed to talk about it. Your only friends are each other. And so you're only going to be exchanging ideas with each other, which then we go, well, why are red pillars becoming alt-righters? And it's like, because that's the only other people that they can talk to that have different ideas. Of course they become that. This is actually how ideas evolve, is through conversation. And we're seeing evidence of this. The problem is that we just have two onions on either side and it's killing our society. It's really, really bad. So Hannah Arendt, if anyone's a nerd, she talks about this. She talks about totalitarianism. I take this and map it onto group thinking and stuff. But yeah, that's
I would. That's this is an interesting paradigm. I think I would disagree with that, though. I think that the pickup and the black pill community are fundamentally different, or like not even different. They're opposite sides of a lot of issues. Like, for example, and I wouldn't say that the pickup community. I disagree with this also with the assumption that the pickup community is more reasonable than the red pill community, right? Actually, the pickup community can be very delusional on certain issues. A popular talking point in the pickup community for a long time, which I pushed back heavily against, is that looks don't matter at all. This is a common talking point in the pickup community. Looks don't matter at all. Pure nonsense, right? Me and you both know that looks fucking matter. Of course they do, right? So that's a really delusional theory that the pickup community has. I think that's just as silly as saying what the black pill says, which is that looks are the only things that matter. They're both crazy statements, and one of them is not like more or less rational than the other. But the pickup community and the black pill community are on opposite sides of that. The pickup community says looks don't matter at all. Black pill community says looks are the only things that matter. Completely opposite sides. And on a whole bunch of these like kind of topics, you'll find that the pickup and the black pill community are literally like polar opposites. Like pickup community will say that game is the only thing that matters. Black pill community will say that game doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as game. They deny its existence. So yeah, I don't know. I see it more of like a kind of like a spectrum, and they're just on opposite sides on a lot of these issues.
What about opposite sides of the same onion? Because I think all of these groups have fundamental axioms. There's another really interesting piece. It's written by have you ever heard of the Slate Star Codex? So basically, there's a writer. His name is Scott Alexander. He is a psychiatrist, and he's also a giga chad. Pulls bitches like crazy. I'm just kidding. I have no idea. Probably not, actually. I'm going to be honest. He probably doesn't. He's very smart. And he talks about how this idea that the in and out group has shifted so much because your out group to some extent has to share some axioms as you. They have to somewhat be in the landscape, right? When we talk about the out group of like Canadians, the reality is like Afghanistan people are not the out group of Canadians. Canadians never think about Afghanistanis. We don't care. We never talk about them. We don't have any feelings about them for the most part in any way because they're just not even on our they're not within our onion at all. We just don't give a fuck, right? It's the same thing like if you see a whole bunch of Christians, right? The whole Protestant reform is an onion, but within it, there's a whole bunch of different groups and they all fucking hate each other. And they hate each other more than people outside of the onion half the time hate them. And they infight constantly. But if you give them like a common enemy out here, outside of the onion, a lot of them will rally and push against that. So one common axiom is going to be, for example, feminism is not the answer for men, right? It seems like most of these groups would agree that feminism has been broadly harmful for men, that it hasn't offered any of the necessary things. And they might say like, yeah, of course, like feminism is like, we want the genders to be equal is fine. That would be the most outside of the onion group would say that. But I think all of them would agree feminism isn't really the solution that we need for men. And they're going to have other kind of fundamental axioms about how they view the world that is similar, even if they infight. Infighting within the group is totally normal and expected because if you're here and somebody's 2 levels more extreme, you're going to disagree still about a fair bit. But the axioms that you're disagreeing about, when you say women, it means the same thing to one another. You guys both know what you're talking about.
Well,
right? When
look,
I talk with a leftist, like a really far leftist, if I say woman, or if a conservative, more importantly, when a conservative talks to a leftist about what is a woman, we know that those definitions aren't the same. And they spend the whole time quibbling over definitions. If you're not quibbling over definitions that much, to some extent, in my view, this is my theory at least, you're probably a little bit part of the same onion to some extent.
yeah, let's explore that. So you mentioned one, feminism. That's true. What are some other axioms that you think are apply to the pickup community and the black pill community? We'll just go through them one by one. I'll tell you if they're true or
I'll
not.
be fully
I,
clear. I'm still thinking about this. So this is a very in develop. I've been thinking about this theory. This is the thing, right? I think about things for like 7 months straight. And so that's one axiom I can identify really clearly. I would need to think more. What are other axioms that these groups share? Most of them have a very similar perspective about trans identity and LGBTQ issues and are typically not overly welcoming. Depending on the level of they might not hate them. Right, black pills might be like they're dirty, gross, and horrible, and trans isn't real. Whereas like the most outside group is kind of probably going to be like, they're real. We don't fuck with that. Like we're not interested, right? But I think
so
all of them wouldn't be super welcoming to the LGBTQ community.
So that one I will push back on. The pickup community is actually quite friendly. At least there's obviously always exceptions. But like a big thing in the pickup community is like, oh, let's go to a gay club to pick up girls, right? It's actually pretty friendly. There was a talking about advantage, like, oh, does it make sense to have like a gay friend to help you? So I would say the pickup community is just as welcoming of that community as the average person in America. Sure, there's some people who like it more, but I've not seen in the black pill community. Yeah, I have seen like they really don't like trans, but in the pickup community, I've not seen any kind of like anti-trans sentiment at all, to be honest.
That's fair. I've also I would say you're one of the most moderate in the pickup community that I've spoken to. And you still overall had the reaction of like, what if you woke up and realized that it was a trans woman, right? So there's still this idea of like, but we're not interested in like trans women. So I agree that you guys aren't like running around being like trans aren't real and fuck them and blah, 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 and like, burning down the pride flag and stuff like that. But there's still this kind of like overall revulsion, this overall feeling of like, yeah, but we don't fuck with that. Like gays are our homies. That's fine. But like, I'm not going to date or have sex with a trans woman.
Well, I think that's 99% of men, though. Like, I think 99% of men, if they woke up next
probably
to
not
somebody,
99 at this point anymore, but like probably 80%, like the majority for sure.
I would say it's like the overwhelming majority of men, if they woke up next to someone they thought was a woman, turned out to be a man, they would have a feeling of repulsion. And I don't think that's indicative of any kind of anti-trans sentiment. It's just like that's turns you off, right? Like you're just not into other dudes. And I think that's perfectly normal and acceptable. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that's like pretty much a man thing, like a guy thing. And I think on some extent with a woman thing too. Like if you woke up next to a guy that you thought was, I don't know, like you thought that he was your age, but then you realize he's like 65 years old. You might get it's less extreme, but some women might get a feeling of like repulsion, right? They're like, ew, this is an old guy. It's not the same. It's not the same, but I'm just trying to like paint the picture. So, and I don't think that makes you like a anti-old people. It's just like, you don't want to fuck an old guy, right? And just, it's the same thing here. It's like, I'm not anti-trans. I just don't want to fuck like a trans person, right? So yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that like the pickup community's like opinion on that whole community is literally exactly the same as like the average person's. Some pickup guys are more friendly, some otherwise, but I don't see any kind of difference in that at all, actually. I'd be curious, what are some of the other pickup guys you've talked to? I can tell you if they're like what their status in the community is, basically.
I don't think any of them are on YouTube. They're going to be much more like pickup artist guys who like work locally and have like a small business in town. So I could list their names, but they don't have YouTube. So and they're Canadian. So there's like, I don't know if they'd ever be mingling with you at all.
So they're not like thought leaders in the community, basically.
No, but just to be clear, I've spent a lot of time listening to pickup artists and stuff like that. So like, I'm not trying to say like, I guess I think I said I've talked to a lot of pickup artists. I've also listened to a lot of pickup artists as well. I'm trying to think. We've got people like, I never memorize these guys' names. He's older now. He's a white dude. He's got like a very square head.
That's like 95%.
I know, and his hair's straight up, but that's still 95% of the pickup artist dudes. I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I don't know if you've moved me on. Actually, your response makes me more convinced that the trans pieces and like LGBT stuff is probably actually a shared axiom, because it feels like more than a preference. I think preferences are totally fine, but if you're basically saying like if you woke up and there'd be like if there's like any level of like revulsion, it feels like more than a preference inherently, especially like if you're calling them trans but you're not willing to call them like a woman or something. To me, I'm like there's a shared axiom. I'm not saying that, just to be clear, I'm not saying pickup artists need to start like having lots of sex with trans women, but there's a shared axiom that's essentially to some extent questioning the trans experience and the trans identity.
No, I think I would fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think like it's a matter of questioning. I mean, I could care less about labels. I could call it a woman, but it's just like for the sake of clarity, if I say a woman, then that example is not going to register, right? Because then you're going to think when I say woman, you think of like a traditional woman. You don't think of like a trans woman, right? So that's the reason behind the whatever the language that I use is for the sake of understanding. It's not like to prove a point or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
no, I got you. I'm mostly saying like I'm not saying that we should say woman and then everyone's like what kind of. I'm saying like most people would identify them as trans woman, and then if you need to make the separation, you'd say trans women and cis women and stuff like that, right? I think there's an inherent axiom assumption in it. So I'll tell you my axioms in my world. I'm so aware of trans identity and all that stuff that if I'm talking about trans women, I will always make it clear that I'm talking about trans women, right? And if I'm talking about cis women, I'll typically just say cis women because I have enough viewers. They're part of my axiom enough that I realize that most of the people in my landscape need that extra clarification of which label I'm using specifically. Whereas in your guys' group, the category woman assumes one thing always, basically.
Right, but I would argue that I think actually your view, which there's nothing wrong with, or that language is the minority versus like it's not just. I think that most people actually use that similar language as me. I think that you're a content creator, you're a YouTuber, and I think a lot of your audience is like left leaning from what I've seen. Uh,
Probably, yeah.
so like I think that's like the language that makes sense for you to use, but most people are not YouTubers or Twitchers or debaters, right? Most people just whatever work, whatever job. I do think like from what I've seen, and I hang out with people far outside the pickup community, that's the language that they use.
Sure.
And I'm
I'd
friends
give
with
you that.
some pretty liberal people too. So I would say that that kind of like acronyms that you're using, you're actually in the minority with that.
Yeah, that's fair. You know what? I'll fully agree. And like maybe trans, like I said, I'm not full sure about these axioms, but maybe trans isn't one. I'd be interested about the assumption around money and dating. Specifically, I think it is a uniquely pickup artist red pill, like that onion view, that money is pretty fundamental. Now, just to be clear, just because an axiom, whether an axiom is true or not, isn't the point I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to say that this is assumed to be true. This is kind of like a fundamental assumption around dating, for example, that like money is going to be really important, that men are probably going to do better when they have money.
Yeah.
Whereas another camp would not assume that, right? Like a feminist camp or more left onion in this case wouldn't.
Yeah, so I would say the pickup community would be very similar to the feminist community. The pickup community doesn't think money matters at all, generally speaking, or matters very little. It's only the red pill community and black pill community that stresses money. But yeah, the pickup community, most of it at least, doesn't care about money or thinks the money is irrelevant.
So you don't think that it affects your chances of finding a partner, like at all?
Oh, me personally, well, I keep in mind I also have a lot of beliefs that are conventionally like outside the pickup community. That's why I know that's if I had to pick one, I would pick the pickup community to identify with. But I hold beliefs that I have some beliefs that are that the black pillars thing. I have some beliefs that are red pill, some beliefs that are pickup, some beliefs that no one has besides me. I think money, it depends what kind of girl you're going for. If you're going for sugar babies, money makes a huge difference. But for like the average girl, I think money is largely irrelevant or not, at least not nearly as important. Okay, let me explain it in a more nuanced way. I think once you get past a certain point, money doesn't matter. Meaning if you're like really poor and you're living in your mom's basement and you make a little bit more money and you get your own place in like a decent part of town, that can actually make a tangible difference in your dating results. But I think once you've reached that like point of middle class, money is like extremely diminishing returns and actually doesn't really make that much difference. If you go from making 100,000 a year to making 300,000 a year, that's not actually going to have any kind of tangible increase on your dating results unless you're going for sugar babies. I can tell you with myself personally, I've been broke and I've been like top 1%. And I used to do better when I was broke because I had more time to dedicate to picking up girls. So yeah, like using myself and like all my friends as examples, it's like what are you talking about? Money helps you. Like unless you're going for sugar babies, you actually spend so much of your time working on your business and shit that you're actually spending less time going out picking up girls.
What maybe I'd be curious then to pick your brain. What do you think actually contributes to dating success for men?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is status and fame. That can make the humongous difference. So like
Could we separate those? So what's or are they the same? Like is clout and status the same? Like fame essentially is all the same thing?
So fame, let me explain it kind of like this. If you have fame, you automatically have if you have status, if you have fame, you automatically have status, but if you have status, you don't automatically have fame. So you can have a high level of status. Like let's say you're the owner of the club, right? In that club, you have a extremely high level of status. You might even have more status than like a D-list celebrity in that club, right? But you don't have fame. You just have status in that environment. Outside that environment, you're nobody, right? If it's not your club, no one really knows who you are. No one cares. Versus fame is more like universal, right? Like fame is like, oh, I know this person, I recognize them, right? Like I've seen this person on TV or seen him here. Versus like status is more like situational, basically.
Yeah, like I would view it as like, if you've got somebody and they're like, I'm like uh, a rocket engineer or like a lawyer or something like that. There's going to be a decent amount of status that's conferred with that title, but that doesn't mean that you're famous necessarily. And would you basically argue that in dating, fame is always going to outperform status? I get that they're intrinsically linked, but if you have fame, you'll pull better than somebody who has even if they're the CEO of like a obscure company, so high amounts of status, somebody with fame would pull better overall.
Yeah, most likely. I think there might be some exceptions. I think not all status is the same. So you could be like, I don't know, like a top engineer at Boeing, right? Which is like a lot of status within that community, but Boeing is like 95% dudes. And while that might help you pull chicks at Boeing, if you want to date within your workplace, it's not going to help you anywhere else, right? Versus if you're like the owner of the club and like there's a lot of hot girls going to your club, that kind of status will help you a lot more in terms of your success than like being the top engineer at Boeing. Who's inventing the rockets or the planes or whatever. But yeah, I would say fame is definitely much surer of a bet because it's much broader appeal. So more people will know who you are. So yeah, I just don't, not all status is the same, but I think generally, yes, fame will be more beneficial.
Do you think that this is going to be more true for like younger women who are more involved in hookup culture? Because in general, I would say like I would agree, especially if we're talking about like oftentimes like women in their 20s. I just think for the most part, maybe I should say maybe outside of Miami, some of these things shift. And I'm not fully sure where I fall on this, but I wonder to what extent things like fame, for example, is going to be a pull for a 20-year-old. Would that differ for a 30-year-old?
Um, I think yes. I think there is a little bit of a shift. I think it's going to be like one hell of a drug either way, regardless of the girl's age. But I think for some girls, it might be like I don't know, like smoking a joint. For some girls, it's like doing a line of coke, right? There's different like impact that it will have. It will have an impact on pretty much any girl, but on some girls, it will have way more of an impact than others. Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Okay. Because a lot of times when I think about like when we're making these generalizations, because I make them all the time as well, I'm always conscious of this piece of being like, I wonder to what extent this applies to more hookup culture specifically, right? Because there's a pretty big difference when your goal is sex more like casual hookup. You're going to be selecting and engaging in different types of like behavioral strategies than if you're looking for like long-term committed partner. And so, yeah,
I
I'll
think
start there.
it's really easy though to go from if you're a guy who can get a lot of sex, it's going to be pretty easy to get into relationships. Like it's pretty easy to go from sex to relationships, but it's not that easy to go from no sex to sex. So that's like the big hurdle for a lot of guys is to actually get to the point of sex. I think if unless you have some major issues that you're doing like down the line, like I don't know, like like once a week you go through like some kind of crazy temper tantrum where you like break all the windows, with the exception of like some weird one-off case. If you're a guy who can get a lot of sex, you'll do all right when it comes to relationships too. At least getting into a relationship, you might not be able to sustain the relationship for whatever reason, but just getting into the relationship, that wouldn't be an issue.
And I would agree, but I would argue that that's not because of the sex specifically. It's because women in general tend to be choosy, even with sexual partners. So if she's willing to have sex with you, she's also much more likely to want to date you.
Yeah.
So it feels like more of an artifact, right? But the issue is if you teach men mostly skills to get sex and their goal is to get a long-term relationship, the skills required to get sex are not necessarily the skills required to maintain, as you said. And then these men are, I'd be curious, do they get like frustrated and burnt because they've able to have sex, but they're not really able to maintain the relationship?
Well, I think it all starts at the same place. So at least it's very similar. I think that if you want to have in a relationship with a girl, like your end goal is to have like a long-term relationship, that does typically start with sex unless it's like you're Christian and you're waiting till marriage. I think generally speaking, for most of the time in the modern culture, it starts with sex. And then the question is, what do you do after that? I get this all the time. Guys are like, well, Alex, I love your content, but like, I want to have a girlfriend. Like, I'm not looking for these easy Tinder girls. I'm looking for like a girlfriend. I'm like, well, you still have to sleep with a girl, and then like you can build on that. So I think the foundation is very similar. Is just what happens after sex. So if you're looking to date the girl after sex, you would probably cuddle with her, maybe invite her to spend the night, keep hanging out with her, right? Not get needy, right? Like do all that versus like, if you're just looking for sex for one night, you might just like chill with her for like 20 minutes and call it a night. So, but the road to sex is very similar. The one thing I would say, the only difference I would make is in terms of what you're screening for. When you're looking for just casual sex, you're going to give more preferential treatment to looks and easiness to hook up with, versus if you're looking for a relationship, you're going to give more preferential treatment to like positive qualities, like personality types of things and values. But so you might screen for different things, but the process is initially going to be the same.
Yeah, I definitely think like getting in the door is going to be an issue. I don't think that to have a relationship you have to have sex. I mostly think that that's it's a handy heuristic because most women who are willing to have sex with you are also going to be willing to date you. But the issue is if you build your whole skill set for relationship just to getting you into sex and having sex, you haven't actually built any of the skills necessary to maintain a good relationship. And I'm going to be clear, like I really do think that breaking the ice and kind of getting to the first date, getting to sex or whatever, there's a certain number of skills. The issue is that those skills don't super well map on long term, especially if those skills aren't really a super honest version of yourself. They're just like skills that you've learned of like, this is what charisma looks like, blah, blah, blah. And so you're not like really yourself until you have sex and now you're dating. Now what, essentially? So what do you tell men for the now what?
Yeah, I think we fundamentally disagree on that. I would say that the skills to have sex, that's like 60% of the work, 65% of the work, and then you just have another 35% left. So you take those skills and you build on them. You build other things. Like for example, to have a good relationship, you need good communication, right? You don't really need great communication just to get laid. So that's an additional skill. That's the part of the additional 30%. I think another one is you need, besides good communication, I think you need, I would say you need the ability to be able to set boundaries for a good relationship. I don't think you really need that as much to get laid. Maybe to a small extent, but not really as much. So there is an additional 30%, but I think the majority of the work has already been done at that point.
So what skills do you think you develop just to have sex that also make you a good partner?
Yeah, well, so I would say that you need to be I think, okay, so I'll explain like this. I think you need to be confident, charismatic. You need to be the type of guy that women find attractive. You have to be.
What does that mean? Sorry, type of guy that women find attractive.
Well, like the type of guy, like meaning it can be a number of things, but I would say like that would be like being assertive, being dominant, being charismatic, being confident, being able to move things forward, being able to lead, right? Being able to take a joke, not get emotionally reactive to different situations, being able to pass shit test, right? Those are all qualities that women find attractive. Also be able to handle various situations, right? Like, for example, let's say you and the girl are on your first date, and the waiter, I don't know, let's say like some guy comes up and he starts being a jerk, right? That's a situation. You need to know how to handle that. Are you gonna like rage out and start a fight? Are you gonna like hide in the corner, right? Like neither one of those is a good reaction. Or you're gonna like confidently and calmly handle the situation, right? So there's a whole bunch of situations that you need to be able, that just come up throughout the course of interaction that you need to be able to deal with, like in an attractive manner. So I think it starts with that. I just think it builds on it, like relationship skills build on that. But like I do think for the vast majority of guys, the hard part is getting in the door, is getting to the point of where the girl sleeps with you. Once you can do that, I'm not going to say it's like you have everything. There are additional things that you need to be able to do. But I think the hard part is already done at that point, in my opinion.
Do you think the goal of a dating coach should be to get guys into the door? Because I'm like, yes, the hard part is getting the guy in the door, but then the harder part is not getting a divorce 2 years later. And I don't think dating coach skills are super aimed towards that. Other than I'm curious about what you teach because I don't want to assume when you say emotionally reactive stuff, because it might be really healthy stuff or it might be like bottle until you get the sex, right? Which would be the less healthy version of that.
It's
But
definitely the former. Yeah. So when I say I don't mean like bottle up your emotions, being emotionally reactive would be like if a girl, I don't know, like throws a playful jab at you, right? And it's maybe like, okay, let's take me, for example, right? I have a little bit of a receding hairline, right? My whole audience knows it, right? It's a little bit of like a sore spot for me, right? And sometimes girls will test me on that and they'll be like, you'd be like, "Ooh, what's going on?" Like, I don't know, like let's say a girl like doesn't know that's like a sore spot for me, and she makes a joke. She's be like, "Ooh, are you gonna? What happened to your hair?" or something like that, right? I don't know. Let's just take that. Now, a guy who gets emotionally reactive would be like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? That's not cool." Right? Versus a guy who's not emotionally reactive might just make a joke and be like, "I left it at home. I'll bring it to our second date." Right?
right.
Two totally different ways of handling the same situation. Uh,
How do you
but
teach the men to handle it the second way? Because I agree that the not taking yourself so seriously is the way I would communicate that to people. So don't take yourself so seriously. Like it's fine. How do you teach men to do that though?
that's a common question I get asked because people are always like, "You're like," just to for clarify, you're a super chill person to talk to, but for like a lot of the people I debate are like super crazy. So they're like, "Dude, how do you stay so calm and grounded? Like, why do you never flip out?" I think well, I'll preface it by saying I've always been a fairly calm person. So I'm not like, I've never been like a super hothead. But I think a lot of that has to do with exposing yourself to stressful situations and just getting that repeated experience over and over again and practicing like cooling down. So I used to work in sales. Sales, you get like the most brutal rejections ever. People saying, "Get the fuck off my lawn," right? Your emotions just flare up, right? Bam. It's just like a hit. Now, how do you handle that? Do you flip out on the customer and say, "Well, fuck you, dude"? Well, you can't do that because you're going to lose your job, right? So the only way you really can handle that is to grab that emotion, right? And just like let it pass by, right? You do that over and over and over again. And then suddenly, like, the emotions don't just have the same kind of effect on you. So
Hmm.
instead of having that natural inclination for to flip out, you just kind of laugh it off, right? It's like whatever, like fuck this person. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of that is just exposure therapy, is just exposing yourself to stressors over and over and over again. Uh, and that will make you like, more grounded and like more better able to handle these situations without getting reactive, especially sales, because you have your career on the line. You literally don't have like on a date, you actually have the luxury of getting reactive because I mean, assuming like it's not in a violent way, because the worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work out with that girl. But when it's sales, the worst thing that can happen is you lose your job.
Yeah.
There's a lot on the line if you get reactive. Uh, so yeah, so I think that's kind of my answer to that.
Okay, I'd be curious though because I would agree. Like the way that you basically like grab hold of that emotion and like kind of let it pass you by is a really good technique. But when you're in a relationship, for example, if you have a woman and she throws playful jabs at your hair, but now you want to be in a long-term relationship and she keeps making fun of your hair and it makes you feel some sort of way
Oh, you
at some
definitely need
point.
to discuss it. Yeah.
Okay, so then how do you typically talk with men about like how do they discuss that with somebody?
Well, also not being emotionally reactive will still. So let me kind of give a personal example. So it still applies
Mhm.
in a relationship. So I'm in a great relationship, right? My girlfriend is awesome. she has a tendency sometimes to jump to conclusions, right? Which is something we've been working on. And sometimes when she jumps to conclusion, it really upsets me, right? I get like really upset in that moment. I want to say something that I might later regret. So that skill is still useful for to control my emotions, so I can ground myself, so I don't say something that will escalate the fight, but I still communicate to her how upset I am or how I'm unhappy with what she said. But rather than doing it in an emotional way where I'm coming at her and I'm escalating the situation into a full blown fight, I'm explaining to her calmly in a way that resolves the situation. Right. So it's still a very useful skill in relationships. But I agree with
Mhm.
you. You're definitely not like, yeah, if there's something your girlfriend is doing that upsets you, 100% want to communicate to her. But you can communicate to her by yelling at her and by flipping out, or you communicate to her in a very grounded, calm, relaxed way. And the latter is going to have a much better impact and effect on your relationship.
Right. I'd be interested because you also mentioned, part of getting sex is to be confident and charismatic. Um, the issue is confident is a very meaningless word to me
Hmm.
because it's pretty easy to say, well, just be confident. And it's like, what the fuck does that even mean? And how do I do that? And what if I'm not confident? Like, what if I am kind of a loser? I can fake it, but at some point in the relationship, if I have nothing to kind of stand on to some extent, I'm not actually confident. So then it's like, do I just lie to her? Do I pretend? How do I navigate that? So I'd be
Mm.
curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny because I was actually like discussing this pretty extensively last night. So I don't think you can even fake confidence to get sex. Meaning, like, if you're a guy who's super timid, if you like watch my con, you're like, oh, Alex is this like confident, ballsy guy, and you put on an act where you're like, let's just put a number on it. You're level 1 confidence, and you put on an act and pretend to be level 10 confidence. The girl will see right through that shit, and she's not going to sleep with you because she's going to be like, this guy's putting on an act. So I don't think you can even use that to even get sex. I don't think you can even use it to get a date. I think women are really socially in tune and they can pick up on this like massive charade or facade that guys put on. So I don't think you can even use it to even get to that point of sex. Um, but confidence comes from competence typically. So the more experience and success you have in activity, the more confident you feel. Right. The first time I did a speech, like a public speech, even though I was pretty confident with women in other areas of my life, I was quite nervous to give the speech. Right. I had to take like 2 Clonopins because I was so nervous. Even though I was confident in other areas of my life, but as I kept doing public speaking, I didn't really need to do that anymore because I felt confident, right? So it comes from competence, or it comes from experience, right? It comes from doing things and getting good reactions, good results, i.e., success, and that builds your confidence. So I think that's a humongous part of it. I think there's also another element too, which is like core competence and core self-esteem, which is just like how you view yourself and your past trauma, which I do think matters. But I think even the bigger component is the competence when it comes to that specific type of skill or activity.
Right. So a lot of time when I talk about this, I basically describe confidence as like confidence doesn't really matter. Confidence is essentially a heuristic for perceived competence. At some point, there's this strange thing that we humans do, which is if somebody is decently competent at something, we kind of generalize it and we just assume that they're probably competent at most things. So if somebody's really good at school, we kind of just assume they're good at most of adult life, even if they're not, right? And so a large part of confidence is actually just people perceiving you to be competent at something, right? If you watch a guy who's super good at sports, they'll be like, I've heard lots of women talk to me like, man, he's just like so confident and like charismatic. And I'm like, the dude's playing a sport. Like, we've never heard him talk. We have no idea if he's any of these things. He's just competent. He's exceedingly competent at something, right? Because I would basically argue anyone can be competent at something. You just have to find what you're good at, essentially. And that generalizes pretty well. Um, I'd be curious, how do you feel about the advice of just be yourself?
I'll answer that question, but let me first touch on what you said. So I would kind of disagree with that. I think there's a little bit of, so let me understand your position correctly. So you're saying there's a massive bleed over effect. So if you're just like really competent in one area, that will bleed over to all other areas of your life and people perceive you as confident. Is
So
that
it
correct?
won't bleed over in that you'll actually be competent, and it has to be an area that we value, right? So if you're really, really good at video games, but you're in North America, that doesn't matter. But if you're really good at video games in South Korea, fucking A game. So it's perceived competence broadly and something that society values to some extent.
I think there's a little bit of a bleeding over effect. I don't think it's substantial, meaning like I know plenty of guys who are like ultra rich and ultra successful in their career. They're the CEO and they're extremely confident in their workplace because they're the top of the ladder, right? And that's something we value, which is like, money. But when it comes to girls, they have like close to zero confidence. They're like stumbling fools, like, oh, yeah. Right? Like they're like having like almost like a seizure every time a girl looks at them the wrong way. So yeah, I don't think the bleed over effect is even nearly that substantial. And most girls would look at those guys and they'll be like, this guy's a loser. And I'll be like, do you know he's the CEO of his company? And they're like, really? No fucking way. So I would almost argue the opposite. Can I just get water real quick?
Absolutely. I'm going to grab water too, actually. Okay. So to clarify, the difference is I'm talking about what the external individual, the viewer, perceives as confidence, and you're talking about kind of the internal experience. Sorry, there's a loud truck. Okay. So basically, the difference to me is if you are perceived as being competent in some area, people tend to assume that you're confident, and therefore also they'll generalize it and just assume that you're probably decently competent in most areas. So the woman who is unattracted to the CEO, if she had just seen him in work, she would think he was a confident giga chad. Because he's extremely competent. The issue is that a lot of men don't realize that this perceived competence does bleed over as long as basically they don't totally fuck it up, right? The issue is that when they're talking with the women, they're not exuding any level of competence because they're extremely nervous and not competent at all with women, right? And so this is why, for example, I encourage a lot of men. I basically tell most men online dating is like playing dating on nightmare mode. The best place to meet women is going to be like things like co-ed sports, co-ed activities, or volunteering, because there's lots of women. You have a mutual activity, and if you're decently good at that activity, you immediately have perceived competence. And as long as you just lean into that and relax a little bit, it tends to do a lot of heavy lifting for you.
Yes. Okay. So let me respond to that. So the one quick thing I want to mention, I disagree with. I think dating apps are competitive, but I think they're actually for a lot of guys very doable if they know what they're doing and they have the right kind of photos and the right strategy. But that's a whole different aside. We can get into that later if you want. Going back to the topic of like the confidence. So if we agree on the fact that. So I partially agree with you. Yes. So let's say a woman like that confident CEO or whatever, she sees him at the workplace, but he doesn't know she's there. Like he does not know she exists. She's watching him through some kind of like one-way mirror. She might think that, yes, this guy is really confident when she sees him in the workplace. The problem is that's not going to help him because the minute he opens his mouth with her and he's really not confident, her perception is going to change. She's going to be like, wait, why did I think this guy was so confident, right? Like he's actually like very not confident. So there, and in fact, it might even hurt him, right? Because she's already built up this image in her head and now he's not meeting that expectation and she's just disappointed, right? Because like, let's say he's like insane. Okay, let's do like a more subtle analogy. Let's say he's like a level 10 confidence in the workplace. He's level 5 confidence with women. And she watches him through the one-way mirror and she's assumed he's like the most confident guy ever. Even though level 5 confidence is average, she's going to be massively disappointed. So he might have been better off if she never even saw him at the workplace. So at least that like there's not that massive disappointment. So I would still argue that like having that core competence in one area is not going to substantially help you in a different area because as soon as you start engaging in that area, like your true self is going to come through in that area, and then the person's consideration of you is going to reconfigure it.
See, the issue is that if men realize that they have perceived competence, as long as you relax a little bit, it'll probably be fine. Because I think the issue is the disparity, that he seems so alpha giga chat, all that's great stuff. And then you talk to him and it's like talking to like a nerdy 14-year-old with like pizza face who's like never touched a girl before, right? It's the disparity that's really throwing. But if you seem really perceived competent, even if you're not confident, if you remember, well, she's perceived me as being competent, and I can just relax a little bit, right? Because it's the issue with anxiety. It typically creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. So long as you just relax a little bit. So you don't even have to be confident. You just have to relax. I think that perceived confidence would do a lot more heavy lifting, would give women a lot more grace. Like like when there's like that super, I remember there was always like one super gifted athlete that all the girls would talk about. And then you talk to him and he was so awkward. And all the girls thought it was so cute and sweet and in a fuckable way. Like I know that cute and sweet is typically a bad way, but this guy pulled very well and was very, very uncomfortable with women and very, very awkward to talk with. But his perceived competence did a lot of heavy lifting for him. He just didn't do like common fuck ups that anxiety will do, like get really weird and clingy and stuff like that.
I think we would just probably fundamentally disagree on that. I mean, I don't think I'm like 100% disagreeing with you. I'm partially disagreeing. But yeah, I think that like it's not as simple as just like relax a bit, because I think like it's like why would you be confident in activity that you have no experience in? Now, granted, some people are much more gifted at a certain thing. Like some people they do pretty good by their third or fourth public speech, and for some people it takes 30 or 40. It's the same thing with dating. Some guys do pretty well by their fifth or sixth date, and for some guys it takes 50 or 60, and for some guys it takes 500 or 600. So for sure there's different level of like inherent gifting or talent and how gifted you are at that activity. But it wouldn't really make sense, even if you are a really successful CEO but you've never been on a date, or you haven't been on a date in like half a decade because you were married or something like that, for you to be confident on the date. Like you're just going to be awkward on that date. You're going to be like, and I think like you can try to relax, sure, and that's a good idea. But I think you still need the positive reference experiences to be adequately confident in that area.
Right. Like, so
Unless you're
doing
like
your reps.
insanely gifted, or you're like a total natural. But yeah, like exactly doing the reps. Yeah.
See, this is the thing. I do think perceived competence gives you some level of wiggle room, or just because you're not, if this is your first time, I think, yeah, if you're bad enough, it's not going to do the heavy lifting for you. But if you're just like, for the most part, okay, and you stumble a little bit, but you're like decent at just like some level of exchange, like most men will actually do okay as long as they have some level of perceived competence, which is actually in part why I actually value certain things like pickup artist skills, is because putting in the reps is a very good skill, especially for men that are distinctly highly socially anxious and very, very not good. But to me, there's a really big difference between being confident, being neutral, and being highly anxious and like underconfident to the point that it's causing you failure. Like it feels like there's a gap in between. And as long as you have some level of perceived competence and you're kind of at this neutral state, you'll probably do okay. You won't pull as well as like a highly confident guy as well. But the idea of putting in your reps, I would also agree with, because every time you do your reps, you're right, you're going to get more competent. You're going to get better at it overall, which inherently is going to make you at least appear more confident, even if you're not.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. There's some level of bleed over effect. I think we're just disagreeing on how substantial it is. Like, I would say maybe it will help you a little bit to be perceived competent in a certain field. I think it will help a little bit. I don't think it will help substantially. But this is like a common actually thing that they talk about in the red pill community. They say, hey, if you're struggling with dating, don't focus on dating. Focus on getting your finances in order. Go to the gym, and then the dating stuff will take care of itself. This is something I fundamentally disagree with, because I'm like, the only way you can level up in dating is by dating. You can't focus on other areas of your life and then expect this area to take care of itself. Yes, there's a little bit of bleed over effect, but I think the red pill community operates on this assumption that's like 100% or 90% bleed over effect, where if you just master these other areas of life, by default, the dating stuff will be mastered, which I fundamentally
Mhm.
disagree with.
For
Like
sure.
I don't think I'm like that particularly special, but I would destroy any guy who has like no dating experience who makes millions of dollars. Like they have no chance, and that's not because I'm like super awesome. It's just because they have no experience. I don't care if they make 10,000 times more money than me. That still won't like they won't even come close. It's just because I have so much more experience in that area. And I
Mhm.
would argue that someone who I don't know has even more experience than me, right? But maybe they're like super broke, will probably outdo me, right? So I think the bleed over effect is fairly minimal. And really, the best way to advance in an area is to focus on that area, and focusing on other things, while can help you a little bit, it's not going to help you substantially.
Yeah, sure, probably. I think I would disagree with the red pill. Basically, like as long as you're jack, tall, and handsome, you'll be fine. And it's like, it'll help. It'll help for sure,
Yeah,
especially
it'll
for
help a little
getting you
bit.
to the first date.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like that, especially, this is kind of what I appreciate about this message is what you're communicating is actually going to be better for a long-term relationship, right? The reality is like, yes, being tall, fit, and handsome probably is more likely to get you in the door. It might get you on like the first date, but it's not really going to translate to like a healthier functional relationship. Whereas if you have some level of like knowing, because what you're really teaching men is essentially if you're insecure at something, put in the reps, get the experience, incrementally get better, and shockingly, things improve, which is a really, really good life lesson for anyone to learn in any way and translates well to relationships and to work and to everything because incremental mindsets is a great thing.
Yeah, I think the difference is whether you attack the problem directly or indirectly. The red pill argues for attacking the problem indirectly. So you have a problem, you can't meet any girls. They say attack the problem indirectly by focusing on all these other things, and the stuff will take care of itself. Argue against that. I say attack the problem directly, focus on that one thing that you can't do well, and that's what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, not all these other indirect things. That's like the fundamental disagreement I would have with the red pill community. I think some of them will help more than others. Like I think going to the gym will be more beneficial for success with women than making a lot of money. So some of them have a better bleed over effect than other ones, but the bleed over effect is still fairly minimal.
Do you think a dating coach should be concerned at all about like their long-term success of their clients? So like, yes, a dating coach might get you in the door and all that stuff. Should they be concerned about like 2 years later, a really messy breakup happening or like a divorce?
Well, I think a dating coach's job is to help their clients achieve the kind of dating goals that they have. And I think also part of being a good dating coach is not judging or inflicting your own desires and values on your clients. So, meaning like, that's one thing I really have zero, I could care less whether my client wants to have a lot of casual sex or get married. It makes no difference to me. I have no kind of preferential treatment or anything like that. It matters not. That's their goal. Their goal is completely irrelevant to my own personal goals. And being able to separate that, my own personal goal from my client's goals, is essential skill to have as a dating coach. So to answer your question, it just depends on the goal the client has. If my client's goal is to get laid, I could care less whether they get divorced 2 years from now, because that's not the goal that they presented to me. But if their goal is to have a happily ever after and be married, have a successful marriage, then yes, I do need to teach them the skills to screen out the girls who will take all their shit 2 years from now. So it just really depends on their goals.
How do you vet then having men come in that have like maybe arguably unethical goals? Like you know that the goals that they're achieving for essentially are like vain enough and like as you work with this client concerning enough that you know like they're basically kind of just trying to get theirs and they're like to some extent probably making the world a slightly worse place by the skills that you're giving them. Would you have any concern or
I've never once had that happen where there was a client whose goal was like so despicable that I didn't work with them. Yeah, sure. I mean, if there's something like, dude, I want to use like, I have this business idea where I'm going to videotape girls without their consent and then put it on the porn site. And I need your help to get these girls over so I can like start like an illegal porn site. Or like even worse would be like, hey, I want to use these pickup skills to sleep with underage girls or something like that. Like that would be a hard no for me, right? I'm not gonna like help pedophilia. But that has never happened to me in all honesty. I try not to judge. Like I think it's important not to judge your clients. And
Mhm.
inflict. This is something I think a lot of YouTubers and just people in general struggle with, is they cannot separate, like a lot of coaches, they cannot separate their own values and ethics from that of their clients, which is something I think I'm really good at, which is separating my own values from that of my clients. So I try not to judge their goals, as long as it's not something that's illegal or something that like is highly against my values, like something that would just be like really messed up. But I've never had that happen. I think most
Right.
people who have like messed up intentions, they're pretty conscious of that and they won't even tell you that.
Okay, that's interesting. Probably this is some level of orientation difference when I'm like talking with men and women about like relationships and stuff. But I also come from a psych background. I'm an addictions counselor, and I've done like individual counseling for at least like 2 years straight. So like my goal anytime I have a client is I want to see them live a better, happier, healthier life. Like that's my goal for everyone. So it's like, but I understand that part of that bias is coming in of most people are coming to see an addiction counselor because they want to live a happier, healthier, wholer life, right? But when it comes to dating, for example, if people are when I'm like talking about dating and like giving basically like my suggestions and advice for like relationships, I don't really care about getting men laid. I don't want that. Like if they want that based, cool, and some of the strategies might help. But what I want is for men to live happier, wholer, healthier lives, essentially. And I think part of that is finding a partner and having a relationship. And so a lot of these skills are necessary for that. Um, but
But who
that's
are we?
maybe different orientation because I don't know like I don't do any dating coaching, so it's irrelevant, but I would never like advocate, for example, of just being like, yeah, just like fuck as many people as you can based. Like I would never advocate for that. I would never be interested in advocating for that because I don't believe that. I don't believe it's going to make somebody happy, healthy, and whole.
But then the counterpoint I would give is who are we to I guess decide what is going to make that person happier? Because for some people, yes, getting married and having a long term relationship will make them happier, but some people are happier single, right? You know, they don't want that's not so. It's like, is it even like our like I guess my place? I guess I'm going to use myself. Is it my place as a coach to like make that decision for them? My answer is no. Now I never push people in a direction. I don't say like, oh, I think you should be fucking a lot of girls. That it's totally irrelevant to me what their goals are. It's just my job is to help them achieve their goals. And I get like a whole variety. I get every end of the spectrum. Some guys, they just want to fuck a lot of chicks. That's all they want. And some guys want to get married and have kids and get into a relationship. And there's guys who want everything in between those two things. And it's like, I have no dog in that fight. I really don't care what the guy wants. My job is simply to help them achieve their goal. And I think that's what a good coach should do. I think a good coach should not inflict like their own preferences and their own desires on their client. I think a good coach should help the client achieve their goals, assuming it's not something illegal or highly unethical.
Right. So I guess with the individual that comes in and says, I want to fuck a lot of chicks, I would basically be like, cool. Why? Why specifically? And if they're like, oh, well, I love sex. I'm like, okay, well, fucking a lot of chicks is one strategy. Probably also be worth getting into some level of community and like sexual experience where there's a lot more free sex and everyone's also pretty good at sex. It sounds like probably number isn't actually what your goal is. If your goal is, I want to have lots of really good sex, it's probably more so you need to be getting connected into a community where there's lots of people willing to have sex and are also good at sex, right? So I guess like that's why it's like, why do you get to decide what's going to make somebody happy? Because people are deeply, deeply unself-aware. And a lot of times when they say, I want this, especially when they're like 19, right? The 19-year-old guy comes in and he's like, I just want to fuck a lot of bitches. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I want to be cool. And I'm like, okay, well, you can be cool in a lot more simpler ways than fucking like a lot. That takes a lot of work, my friend. And you have a high risk of like basically harming somebody as well. Like sex probably shouldn't just be dismissed because fundamentally sex is also a whole other person in the negotiation. If you want to be cool, sex is one way. If you just want to have casual sex because you really enjoy the novelty, that's fine, fucking based, as long as you're like using protection, no problem. But I feel like a lot of time, if we aren't asking people why their goal exists, then we're actually just helping them band-aid a deeper problem, right? A lot of men, the reason why they're saying, I want to have sex with women is because they're like, I want to be seen, I want to be known by somebody, I want to be accepted, and I want intimacy. And it's like, okay, well, sex is one way that you can do that, but intimacy is actually achieved through complex pieces of relationship. It's a mixture of vulnerability, of like some level of like inter-reliance on one another for some level of emotionality, sexuality as well. Even just non-sexual physical touch can be intimacy. And so I'll end there. I'll stop monologuing.
Well, I think the fundamental difference that we have to acknowledge that you and I actually have different job titles. Like you're more of like a therapist or in that field. So it kind of makes sense for you to ask why, right? Because people don't come to you, I'm assuming, to like, I don't know, pimp out their Tinder profile or to like get laid. I'm
They
assuming.
definitely actually do
Oh, do
all the
they?
time.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
And I just to be clear, I'm not opposed to people having sex. I want guys to get laid, but I want them to get laid because they want to get laid, not because getting laid to them is some extra step to actually achieving some level of happiness. I don't want to take your money. If you just want to, like, sure, I could wingman you, cool, but if at the end of the day, after I've taken, like, say I've taken $1,000 from you and you've paid for my experiences and you're still unhappy, you're more resentful of women than you ever were, I would feel like I have failed you and failed society to some extent.
So I guess the big difference is when a coaching client comes to me, I don't think about, is this going to be a win for society or lose for society? I just think about the client. Again, assuming they're not asking me for something illegal or highly unethical. With that aside, I never think about, okay, so is this client's goals going to be a win for society or lose society? That thought never enters my head. Is this a win for my client? I want to do what's best for my client. Will I ask the why questions? Now that I reflect on it, yeah, I do that from time to time, especially if I think that their goal, if something doesn't align. Like if something doesn't line up, I will ask the why and follow the trail of whys. If I think that commonly that will happen if a guy's like, I want to get my ex back, right? That's a question. That's like a thing I get a lot. And with that one, if I feel like usually there is something off, usually it's like because they're desperate or they're needy or they're in a state of scarcity, I will follow the trail of whys and probably maybe even try to talk them out of it within reason. I'll also still help them, but I'll give them the logic for why it's a bad idea. So yes, if there's a misalignment, I feel like there's something off. I will go through the trail of whys. But my ultimate end goal is in no way related to what's better for society. It's purely related to what's betterment of the for the client.
Well, not the betterment, because just to be clear, I said two things. I don't think anyone needs to get, I mean, I can't even predict if I'm making society better. I mostly want to make sure that I'm doing better by my client. But the issue is, if my client has identified a band-aid solution, I'm not doing better by them. I'm just blowing smoke up their ass for a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, like that's sort of like, or like when you think of band-aid solution, I think your mind came to casual sex. For me, it went straight to like getting.
Could be relationships too. Just to be clear,
Yeah.
Relationships are band-aids half the time too. I don't think I don't want to shit on. I don't want anyone to get their takeaway that Kyla is a tradcon who hates casual sex. That's not the issue.
No, but it is interesting that our minds went to different places when we were discussing the same exact like topic. But yeah, I can see how casual sex could be a band-aid as well. I definitely won't dismiss that. Yeah, if I think there's a misalignment, I will follow the trail of whys. But what I want to clarify is if their values are different than mine, but I think they're still like there's consistency there, I will help them get there, even if their values are different than mine. Like, let's assume that, like, okay, I'll give an example. Like, I'm non-religious at all. I'm like agnostic. I think religion is a joke largely. But I do have clients who are like very Christian. They're like, hey man, I just want to meet a nice Christian wife and have a bunch of Christian babies who love Jesus, right? Like my initial reaction is to be like, dude, you believe in fairy tales, but I completely suppress that and I help them accomplish that goal, even though it's like totally non-line with my values. I prefer a girl who's not religious. That's to the extent of like how agnostic I am, but I will help them meet that nice Christian girl because that's their goal. And I think that's my job as a coach, is to suppress my own innate bias and preferences and values and help them achieve things that go along with their values. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're paying you for a service and stuff. I was just trying to understand basically, like, fundamentally, like the ethics behind, like, if you have somebody and you can help them achieve their goals, but also help them to be a healthier and happier person. It sounds like broadly you'd probably want to do that. I'm not convinced most pickup artists are the same. But after having talked with you, especially, it seems like you're somebody who like does actually care and doesn't really want to like peddle more harm out there. I could be wrong.
Well, I don't want to harm the client, right? In terms of like, I'm not.
You also don't want to have a client that cites you when they harmed somebody else, right? You don't want them to be like, "What do you mean? Alex told me to do this. Why am I getting arrested?" Like, you also don't want to be in that position. Which
is why like I won't do anything illegal, right? So if the client is like to give an example, not to keep going back to this, but like client is like in a country where the age of consent is maybe like 16. He's like, hey man, there's this like really innocent 16-year-old girl I want to fuck. I'm like, yeah, dude, like I'm not going to touch that. Like I don't care. Like if it's legal in your country, it's illegal in my country. Like I'm not going to get involved in like that kind of stuff. So yeah, I won't you can even think of it from a purely pragmatic way. I'm not going to get involved in anything that could jeopardize me in any way. But aside from that, like if it's just something that's legal, but maybe like ethically dubious, my goal is to help the client, which usually involves something that helps like people overall, but not always. Sometimes the goals can be selfish in nature. Uh, yeah, and but I've never had anything that was like where I was like, whoa, this is like gross. This is like disgusting. Like this guy's like literally trying to like fuck girls over. I've never encountered that. If I felt like it was something that was like really morally despicable, I probably just wouldn't work with that guy. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I
Okay.
think the difference is what I might find what you might find morally despicable, I might find morally ambiguous.
I am concerned about men getting through the front door. Like they get the sex, they get into the relationship. Turns out there's a lot more skills required for a relationship. They end up with somebody that they're not actually well suited for, and they get burned by that relationship and they come to resent women significantly more. Or another situation where the same type of guy basically pushes for his goal of having sex because he wants to have a relationship with her. She says yes when she's not really quite ready. And now we have like a whole blurry, messy consent thing, basically. I'm very much big on any time it comes to dating relationships, both of your needs matter equally. It is fundamentally a negotiation. And out of a negotiation, both of you should get something ideally that you want. And both of your guys' safety matter first and foremost. That would be my first and foremost. So if my client doesn't get laid but the woman comes away feeling safe, that's fine. Ideally it would be a situation where if they both want to have sex, they negotiate it, she feels safe and they both enjoy the sex, and he feels safe as well, and he doesn't get like weird like claims made against him afterwards.
I think
Yeah.
that's definitely a reasonable position to have. I'll kind of explain it a little bit more in a nuanced way. So
Sure.
I think that like it's a spectrum. Like ethics is a spectrum, right? There's a lot of things that are like ethically dubious, which for some people might be more or less okay, and some people might be kind of messed up. Some people they're totally messed up. The same exact action, right? So it is kind of like a spectrum. Now, I think the reason, and just to be clear, I'm not like saying you're in this category. I'm just saying that like a lot of people I debate, like the TikTok social justice warriors, they're very idealistic, right? They look at things from a very idealistic perspective. And there are some people that are like extremely pragmatic. They're just what works, what doesn't work, like fuck everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm not completely pragmatic, but I am much closer to the pragmatic side than I am to the idealistic side. I think you're probably somewhere in the middle from that I get, but I think I'm definitely closer to the pragmatic side than you are. And I think that like, which is why you and I agree on a lot of things. But like, if when I debate someone who's like purely idealistic, there is a massive misalignment because someone who's idealistic is living purely like, well, is this something that's better for society? That's the first paradigm that everything gets shifted to, versus someone who's pragmatic is looking at through the first paradigm as, is it something that works? Is it something that's effective? Right. And then you can have a complete disconnect when you're on the opposite sense of that spectrum. But yeah, I definitely think I tend to lean more on the pragmatic side for sure. Um, no.
Where do you think I lean idealistically?
I think when you're like just what you were saying when you were describing like the ideal situation is that both parties win, right? Like that, like if the client doesn't get laid, but the girl comes away like whatever, like on maybe even idealistic is the wrong word, but the girl comes away like whatever, happy with the experience, right? That's a little bit kind of closer to the center where you're like, like because if
What
you're
would be what would be the more pragmatic solution there if she's not really interested in and doesn't feel safe to have sex, but he doesn't, but he wants to have sex? What would be the alternative?
assuming there's no like rape or pressure involved, right? Like the pragmatic would be like, okay, did this accomplish my client's goals? If their goal is to get laid, did that accomplish their goal? Almost regardless of the means to the end, as long as it's not something like illegal or you see what I'm saying?
Yes. The issue is I don't feel like mine's idealistic at all. I feel like mine is mostly like egalitarian and negotiated.
What
Right?
does the
Because
word egalitarian mean? Sorry, I just.
more like equal, right? So like approaching
Hmm.
sexual dynamics as like an equal exchange. So it's like your needs and wants don't come first; they come equal to the other person. Both
Ah,
your needs and wants matter. So if you want to get laid, fucking based. But if she doesn't want to have sex with you, and you're gonna have to do like a little bit of work to get her there, in my view, probably just better to not have sex.
Okay, let me use a different paradigm then. I'll use the paradigm of selfless versus selfish, right? Two different paradigms. So selfless is like, so you're kind of in the middle where you're like, my needs are not above or below; they're equal to in terms of importance.
In
So
in it specifically a sexual negotiation exclusively because the commodity that's being negotiated is another person's body. Yes.
right. So a person who's purely selfless would be like, no, like their needs are important, more important than mine. A person who's purely selfish is going to be like, my needs are much more important than them. And you're kind of in the middle where you're saying they're equal in value. What I'm saying
Yes.
is that, like on that spectrum where you're right down the middle, I'll be a little bit closer to the selfish side. Not entirely, but I'll be a little bit closer to where I would be more likely to value my needs as long as there's not severe externalities, right? So I would be leaning a little bit closer to this side.
So if she just feels a little bit manipulated, that might be okay as long as
Right.
you got sex.
Eh, something along the line. Nah, I don't want to phrase it like that. It would be like I would be more comfortable with certain things than, for example, you would be, right? Things that are minorly, yeah, like you can say it like that. Things that are minorly manipulative, like for example, something like a white lie or something like that, which is like kind of like a gray area, or even like a mildly non-white lie or something like that. So an example of that could be like, I don't know, you're like late to a date because you were hooking up with another girl, right? Right. And the other girl is asking, like, oh, why are you 15 minutes late? Right. So I would be okay in that situation saying, oh, I just got stuck in traffic. A little bit unethical, right? But I would be okay with that. Versus I think you would probably be like, that's a little shitty.
It would really depend. I would have a lot of questions about fucking one chick and then booking your time so that you're like running late to go off to try to fuck another chick, just in general.
Let me give you a better analogy that I think actually I just thought of. A good one could be this. This is something where I think we're going to differ on. Double booking. So okay, so Miami or pretty much most U.S. cities super flaky, right? Like girls flake all the time. So the solution to that, really, the only reasonable solution if you want to like get laid, is to triple book dates, right? So you book like 3 girls for 8 p.m., right? And then in theory, one of them shows up. The problem with that is sometimes 2 of the girls show up, right? And then you're left in like a situation where you have to cancel on a girl, right? It's not ideal. We agree on that. But I would probably be okay with doing that. Actually, I know I'm okay with doing that because I've done that in the past many times. Versus, I think you would say, that's a little messed up. You're contributing to the problem.
Probably, and so are probably the women, right? Because I think in this case now, this is where Miami's like this really interesting case study of basically everything that's wrong with dating to the most extreme form, where both parties are constantly thinking just how to get their own. And because we basically have like almost like the tragedy of the commons going on, or because both parties are so consumed with how do I get my own and how do I get mine, that neither person actually matters in the exchange. And I don't blame women for hating men, and I don't blame men for hating women in these dynamics. But this is the thing, I am not willing to contribute to that.
Right. Again, so that goes back to the previous paradigm, which is a more idealistic view of things, which is like I don't want to even contribute to this problem. Versus, I would have a more pragmatic view. This is the reality. It is what it is. I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to do what works for myself.
Yeah, basically, of like, but my goal is to get laid, and it's like, okay, but the goal of getting laid is sex with another person. So like the idea of like, if I'm running from one woman to the next because I just finished having sex with her, I would basically be like, yeah, that's a little bit of bad planning on your part, like in general. I don't know what I would recommend in that situation. I definitely understand, basically, to some extent, saying I'm running late, because then you're not lying. You can just, it's true, you are running late. You don't necessarily have to give the reason.
But if the
But
girl's like, why?
how often does that actually happen?
Well, it's a hypothetical.
Okay, in the hypothetical, when she asks why,
Yeah.
I think honestly, this is where I'm staunch. I don't think you should lie in general. I don't know why you would.
Right. So that's kind of the point I'm trying to make is that
But if she doesn't want a goods, and basically she's saying, I wouldn't want to negotiate sex with somebody if they just came from sex, why would you withhold that information from her? You're basically saying you get to come to the negotiation table and you don't get all the information.
right. So I would
So
see
I
that.
could get mine.
I would see that as like a white irrelevant lie, right? Like the things I would not be okay lying about is like telling the girl that I want a relationship if I'm just looking for sex. I see that as a much more substantial lie. But going back to like I think the second analogy is more interesting. The one where like like triple booking girls, right? Like I think that's like a good one where like we're gonna have different sides of that because we're kind of on different sides of that. And I think that goes back to what I was saying is you would be. I don't think you're super idealistic, but I think you're kind of in the middle on that. Versus I would be the more pragmatic thing to do in that situation is just to make the best out of shitty type of dynamic and just do what works for yourself. Rather than like thinking, oh, fuck this shit. I'm just not going to contribute to this overall problem, right?
Well, the thing is, like, you could triple book girls because you expect that two of them are going to cancel because you live in Miami, where everyone is apparently exceedingly selfish in the dating dynamic, right? So that's fine. But then, for example, if you're with one girl and you're enjoying your time, why don't you just text the next girl and be like, "Hey, any chance we can like bump this by an hour or something like that?" Like just something that's at least honest. Like I don't know, this idea of just like you need to triple book so that you're running from like one dick into the next. I guess like I'm not understanding how this is like necessary or like pragmatic.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, you finish work at 7 p.m. You want to be in bed by 10 p.m. You just have Friday night off. The only time where you can really meet up with girls is 8 p.m. Let's say every date that you set up, there's a 25% chance she shows up. So if you just set up one date for 8 p.m., which is your only time slot where you're available, you have a 25% chance of getting a date. If you set up 4 dates, it's not 100%, but it's up there, right? So the more pragmatic thing to do would be just to set up 4 dates for 8 p.m., which is the only time slot you're available. And ideally, only one of those girls comes through. But life is not ideal. Sometimes 2 of the girls come through or 3 of the girls, and you're like, oh, fuck. Well, now there's 3 girls who I made plans with for 8 p.m. I have to flake on 2 of them. There's no other alternative, right? And flaking is not ideal, right? No one likes to flake, I think. But in that situation, you have no choice. So your only options were either just only making plans with one girl for 8 p.m. And if since there's only 25% chance, most likely just spending Friday night alone, or scheduling 4 girls and flaking on 2 of them if 3 of them come through.
I actually would basically say that flaking on the 2 or 3 is fine then, because you're not lying necessarily. Like nothing's happening other than you're basically casting your wide net. It sucks for them. I would agree that it sucks for them, but this is like inherently like the issue with the entire culture at a hand. But like at a practical level, yeah, I would probably broadly give the recommendation of like, yeah, probably book like 2 or 3 dates or 4, and then if it keeps happening where you're flaking on like one person always, probably reduce the number of dates that you're booking.
Okay, so
for one time.
I'm a little confused because you said earlier you wouldn't want to even contribute to that, so you would like no. Maybe I'm misunderstanding you.
Because there's a difference between contributing to something as like practical as like, look, most people flake and I don't want to be alone, versus like lying to somebody about like, because the original you said is having sex with one girl and running late and then lying to the next girl about why you're running late because you were like, sorry, I was just like, finishing up with the last girl. That to me is the issue. That's really contributing because there's a high level of harm there, right? Where essentially now you're negotiating a sexual relationship with the next girl and you're withholding a pretty important piece of information that she might care about. For example, you can't get an STI test in between having sex with one girl and going on to the next girl. And some girls might be pretty intense of like, I want to know that you've had an STI test pretty recently.
Okay, interesting. Because I would argue that actually the flaking on 2 girls, in my opinion, is worse than the running from one girl to have sex with the other girl. Because you're ruining 2 girls' plans for that night. They planned their evening around hanging out with you. It's a Friday night. They cancel on their girlfriends, and now they're left. They're left without any plans. And like I don't think it's the worst thing ever, but I think it's shitty.
It is shitty.
Yeah, right. It's like, in my opinion, I think that's shittier than telling a girl a white lie that you just got stuck in traffic when you were having sex. I guess that's where you and I differ.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like somebody's time does suck, but the level of risk is pretty low. Having sex and negotiating sex with somebody where part of the important information that might change their answer is withheld is much more harmful, because if knowing that you had just had sex would be a really firm no for her, she probably should know that.
What about something like, okay, I mean, I guess we differ on that in terms of our, how much priority we place on ethics. What about if that the girl wants a guy, like, let's say you read in her Tinder bio, I'm not looking for any broke boys. I want a guy who has like a career, right? Like let's say you read that in her bio, and you're a broke boy, you don't have a job right now. Do you think it would be unethical for you not to even go out with her in the first place? Because I would argue just don't tell her.
It wouldn't be unethical at all. I'm going to ask this question. Do you want a girl who only wants men for their money? Is that really the selection that you're going for? Like, go on a date with her necessarily. I wouldn't lie about your income if she directly asks you, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know. That should be a flag too. And I get it. I get it for guys. It's like cast the net wide necessarily, but definitely don't lie to her about your income. And also, I'm going to be honest, most men don't want women who only want to date men because of their money. Like these are unironically a lot of times the women who like put a hole in the condom and like ensnare the guy to like try to keep like that to me is a huge red flag. And like men are allowed to have some red flags when it comes to dating and relationships. So
no, totally agree with you on that. It's just for a hypothetical example.
Yeah. So in the hypothetical, don't lie. It might not come up, but if she asks you directly, definitely shoot your shot. Like a lot of girls say, "This is what I want," right? And then they'll be like, "I only date men over 6 foot," and then they like meet the man of their dreams, and he's like 5'7", and you're like, "Okay, right." So shoot your shot, but don't lie.
But you then, okay, this is where things get interesting. But then you're kind of okay with lying by omission, right? Because you're like, if like, let's just assume she has that very clearly in her profile, but she doesn't ask you directly. You're kind of and that's what she wants. You're kind of lying by omission by not telling her, right?
The idea that if this is a hookup, I would basically say she doesn't actually care if you're rich for hooking up. Like if she's just looking for a hookup, that doesn't actually matter that much. If she's looking for a long-term relationship, for example, that is going to come out very quickly. It's not really lying by omission, right? This idea of lying by omission is basically, does that mean that when you go on your first date, you have to sit down and be like, okay, time to trauma dump. So just so you know, I have PTSD. I was, sexually molested when I was 6 by my uncle. Also, my parents divorced when I was 12. It was really messy. I also sometimes fantasize about beating up puppies. And what else? Oh, I'm a janitor, right? Like that's not what I'm recommending. But to do that, no one would say that you're lying by omission, right? There's certain things that like people reveal pretty naturally. Job is something that somebody's going to ask you immediately. So if she's looking for a relationship, she gets there on date 1, and she's looking for like some rich guy, she's gonna ask you your job. You probably shouldn't lie about it. That would be my take.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify. I'm okay with lying by omission, but in that situation, like if she clearly has in her Tinder bio, like in this hypothetical, let's assume let's take it one step further. Let's assume that you have a mutual friend with this girl, and your mutual friend tells you, "Hey, this girl is looking for someone who has a career. She has a history of dating losers. She does not want a loser." And let's say you don't, whatever, you're broke and you don't have a job, right? If you show up on that date and you don't tell her that, you are lying by omission. Now, I'm personally okay with it, but we do have to acknowledge that you are in that situation lying by omission.
I just don't think so. Like the idea that if you just don't explicitly tell somebody something that they haven't directly asked you about is lying by omission is just not true. We do that all the time. And like, if you want to call it lying by omission, we can, but now the word lying doesn't mean anything because we just do this. This is how all relationships work, right? When I sit down with people, I don't tell them like, "Oh yeah, here's my like spiciest, strangest political take," right? Here's like some deep inner insecurity that I have about myself. Like that's not how most relationships work. And I think that that's fine. And the idea that like omitting it is lie by omission is a problem. These things pretty often naturally come up. And if there's something, for example, if you're 7 dates in and they still haven't asked you about like maybe you have like a mental health disorder, like you're bipolar, and you're like, I know that she needs to know this at some point. At some point, you should probably offer that information freely, right? But it's never like this like sinister thing of like a lie unless you're going out of your way to hide it. So for example, if you're super poor and you have no money and you keep hitting up girls who only want rich dudes and they say that in their bio, but you roll up and you borrow your friend's Rolex, you rent out a car so that you've got like a really nice car, you've like maybe like rent out a hotel suite or like some sort of Airbnb and pretend that it's your home. Well, that's a whole so maybe she's never asked you, but it's pretty reasonable for her to assume that you have money because you're essentially at this point creating a lie by omission. You're like, well, she didn't ask. And it's like, yeah, but you're like pretty clearly trying to communicate something. But not telling somebody something on like, especially date 1, just doesn't feel like a lie by omission.
No, just not telling someone is not a lie by omission. But if you know for a fact that that's the information that which get her change her mind. If you have keep in mind that's the key distinction in that analogy. Let me do another one. Let's say you are a hardcore Republican and this girl has no Republicans and you have mutual friends and they say she does not want to date a Republican. The last thing this girl wants to do is ever date a Republican. You know that for a fact. You're a Republican. You show up on a date with her. You don't tell her that. In that situation, that's not the same thing as if you don't know what she wants and you're just not revealing your political takes. You know for a fact she doesn't want to date a Republican. You don't tell her that. That is lying by omission. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying it is what it is. Like,
I just don't think it is. Like the idea that this wouldn't come out very quickly, like she's like current politics. If she cares that much about politics, like if let's assume that she says this and she actually means it, this really matters to her. Current cultural topics are going to come up invariably, right? So now if you want to maintain it, now if you want to lie by omission, now you have to say you have opinions that you don't have. But if you just reveal your cards a bit, having like pretty standard Republican positions, for example, she's going to catch on pretty quickly. So like to me, the lying by omission part is where you're not telling them because they haven't asked, but then you're going out of your way to hide them being able to find out that fact. That's the lying by omission. That's the unethical piece.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that they would probably come out naturally, but like assuming in the hypothetical it doesn't, right? Like it's a little bit of a strange hypothetical, but it's a thought experiment. Like assuming that she's not going to actually ask that directly, but you know for a fact, 100% beyond a reasonable doubt that this is something important to her, and it would be a deal breaker for her if she found out you're Republican. You have 10 of her friends tell you if she finds out you're Republican, she will never date you. But for some reason in this hypothetical date, she doesn't actually ask you that. I think in that situation, like it would be hard to say that's not lying by omission.
Potentially, I guess I would view it as like morally neutral. Like you could be at your best. So I think the best situation would be you could tell her if you want to be like the most ethical possible. I guess this is the issue, right? And maybe I didn't explain this clearly enough. When I look at morality, I don't have like moral or immoral. I have moral, mostly neutral is where like most of life exists. And then there are some unethical things. For example, lying by omission where you're actively hiding traits about yourself and they haven't asked, I would say is unethical. But if she's not into Republicans and never asks and the conversations don't come up on date one, I don't think that that's inherently unethical. Like the idea that like if this is really something that she says she cares about, you should probably ask about it. Like why wouldn't she ask about it? It doesn't make you unethical because you're like, oh, by the way, I'm Republican. You know, at best, you could be more ethical and let her know.
Sure.
But I would say in the most ethical, if you know that she would never be interested, maybe just don't shoot your shot with her. Why are you even going on the date in the first place? That could be even more ethical. But I think like people exist within like a pretty broad spectrum between neutral. I just don't want you to do unethical shit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think I look at it more as just like a whatever, like a spectrum, and I think it's definitely a spectrum. There's some things that are unethical, and some things that are more unethical than even that unethical thing, and there's different degrees of it. So yeah, I look at it as a spectrum. To me, like lying by omission would be fully within my fully with like something I would be like comfortable with, or
all things. So looking at it says that it's continuing misrepresentation occurs when an important fact is left out in order to foster a misconception. So there's a full goal of having them believe something different. So this would, for example, be doing stuff intentionally leaving it out so that they have a different belief about you. And in most social exchanges, you're going to have to hide certain facts about yourself, especially really important things like your money.
Yeah, I would say I'm okay with not revealing certain things. Like I would actually be okay with the exception of relationships. I don't think you should lie by omission in relationships because that will come back to bite you in the ass later. But for like little things, for like if you're looking for a hookup or something like that or casual dating, I'll be okay with it. I would also be okay with like white lies. But I would not be okay with substantial lies, right? But I know there's people who would be okay with substantial lies. They're purely pragmatic. And I know there's some people who are the opposite. They're not okay with any kind of lies, whether it's white lies or lying by omission or anything that's in any way potentially dishonest. So there's just like such different spectrums of this.
So there's spectrums, but it doesn't mean it's all ambiguous and unimportant, right? If you are able to reasonably believe that by doing this, you're going to cause decent amount of harm to the individual based on the information you have, you probably shouldn't do it. And everyone in society would say that you're unethical if you do, right? So if a girl is looking for something and you go out of your way to constantly hide from her that this fact does or does not exist in your life, everyone would reasonably believe that when she finds out, what if it's 3 months in? When she finds out, she's of course going to be hurt. It's horrible to be lied to. It actually shatters your worldview. You can't trust yourself and you can't trust other people anymore, right? It's very reasonable to believe that you've done harm. Why would you do this?
Yeah,
Everyone would agree it's unethical and
it's not,
immoral to do.
I would agree with you that there are certain things that pretty much most people would agree is like universally unethical. Like, I don't know, shaming a girl into fucking you. Most people would agree that's unethical, even though it's not illegal, right? But I think most of the stuff is actually ethically dubious, where it's actually somewhere in the middle, where some people would think it's messed up and some people would think it's okay, and some people would be like, it's so, right? So I think
I
most.
disagree with all of them. I think they're all stupid and wrong, and I am right. But unironically, I'm joking, by the way. But unironically, if you can reasonably believe that you're going to be doing harm to somebody, you know that it's unethical. We learn this in grade, like in kindergarten. We know this. And we broadly know what's reasonable to be hurtful. So this is the situation, right? What if you're in the gray zone? If you don't reasonably know if it's going to hurt somebody? And I'm like, well, now you're at the moral neutral territory, and hopefully you don't hurt somebody. If you do, though, when you look back post hoc, yes, you did something wrong, but not as wrong as if you did an action that you reasonably believed would hurt somebody.
But what if it mildly hurts them, like really mildly?
Like in what way? What do you mean?
Let's take something like this. Let's say I'm trying to think of it like a good example of this. Let's say,
would you reasonably believe that it would mildly hurt somebody?
Let's say something like you make plans for 8 p.m. and you okay. Let's do it like this. You agree to plans for 8 p.m. Like the girl is like, okay, let's do it like this. The girl, this is a hypothetical. So, like the girl is like, hey, I can only meet at 8 p.m. I can't do any later, right? And you're like, agree to 8 p.m., but you know you can't really make it until 8:20. You're gonna have to make her wait for 15 or 20 minutes, right? You're mildly hurting her, right? It's mildly you're mildly hurting her feelings and her time. You're not doing significant permanent damage to her, but you're doing mild amount of damage.
Yeah, I would say that that's a little bit unethical. It's not the most unethical. You know, it'd be worse if you raped her, obviously. But it's a little unethical. Why wouldn't you just tell her the truth? Hey, I'm really sorry. I can't make it until 8:20. Any chance you can hold on for me? I'll buy you like an extra entree or something like that.
But like, let's assume in this hypothetical, she will never agree to 8:20. She's like, I only meet at 8 p.m. Any guy who doesn't meet me at 8 p.m., like whatever, just like for the sake of the hypothetical. Like that's kind of an example of a situation where some people would be like, I think that's okay. And some people would be like, no, you shouldn't do that. And some people might be in the middle. You sound like you're one of those people who's in the middle where you're like, it's kind of dubious.
What's reasonable to believe that it would annoy her a fair bit that you like lied and showed up late. But being annoyed at somebody isn't quite the same as what I mean by hurtful, right? Like, I don't think she's going to be super hurt, but I would say, it's a little unethical. It's not the most unethical. You probably shouldn't do it, but you might be able to get away with it. But just to realize she's going to be annoyed. And if she finds out, she's going to know that you're at least willing to lie about pretty small potatoes, like 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's like mildly messed up, right? But it's the question is that, I mean, you and I both agree it's mildly messed up, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. The question is would we advocate for it, or would we personally do it ourselves, right? And the answer for you is no, and the answer for me is yes, right? That's where we kind of lie. We agree on the fact that it's like not ideal, it's mildly messed up. The question is, well, will we do it? And the answer is I would and you would not, right? But there are some things, for example, I just want to be clear, I'm not like some kind of like hardcore pragmatist that only does what's best for myself. There's some things that I would not do, even though they're like really beneficial for me. A whole bunch of things actually, but I'm just saying we're like 25% on different ends of that spectrum.
Sorry, that was a super loud truck. Yeah, we are. I guess the difference would be I wouldn't advocate for it. I'd be like, yeah, it's probably a little bit shitty, but I wouldn't like judge them super hard, right? Like if they're like, oh, well, I did it, I'd be like, okay. And then I would kind of move on with my life. Here's the one thing. if dating advice, if all this advice was given, and now if we flipped genders and we told women like it's okay to be like a little bit shitty, you might be okay with that. In fairness, I think with some level of consistency, you'd probably be like, yeah, that's fine.
Huh?
The issue is that I don't think a lot of the men listening would be fine with that. And I think that that's fair. Because nobody wants to be treated like a commodity of basically being like, yeah, you matter, but like me getting what I want matters a little bit more than you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I would be pretty consistent with that. And I do agree with you. There's some people who would not. I mean, I do think there's some double standards that do sort of make sense that are reasonable. But in terms of ethics of dating, I would probably be like consistent between the genders.
That you'd be okay with women. Like, I think you said you're okay with women shit testing, for example.
Yeah, I'm okay with women shit testing. I'm okay with women telling little white lies. Like I've called my girlfriend in little white lies, but I've never caught her in a substantial lie. And there's a big difference. When I catch her in a white lie, I just laugh about it and make fun of her. If I ever caught her in a substantial lie, I would have to heavily reconsider the relationship, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. I'm extremely opposed to shit testing as well, because the same reasons essentially. I will never advocate for it because it is objectively like making life worse for you and for everyone around you. And I just can't get behind ideas that do that.
Yeah, well, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. We're a little bit different in that sense. I don't think we're substantially different. Like, I don't think you're like super ideological, or neither do I think I'm like super whatever fucking narcissistic or something like that. Uh, I just think we're like kind of a little bit. There is a little bit of that discrepancy there. I do think ethics get interesting because there's a lot of gray area, and I love like asking people hypotheticals and kind of see where they are. And like whether they're consistent with it. I do think that one thing you mentioned is pretty interesting to see if they're consistent, if it applies to the other gender. And sometimes the answer is like definitely no. It's like, oh, it's okay when a man like fucking cheat. Like the one that's interesting in the red pill community, which I put back on, is like it's okay for a man to cheat on his woman, but it's not okay for a woman to cheat on her man. Right? And I'm like, well, that's kind of nonsense. Like cheating is breaking the rules of your relationship. So I don't think it's okay for anyone to break the rules of a relationship. Uh, right? I don't whether it's a guy or girl. I don't think like me cheating on my girlfriend makes it more justified, regardless of the reasons, right? But that's like a common talking point in the red pill community. I understand their logic for it. I just think the logic is flawed. Yeah.
Sure. In the situation where she doesn't want to be out later, starting later than 8 or whatever, and you're going to get there at 8:20, if they get to the date and you're like, hey, just running late, you get there at 8:20 and they're kind of pissed off and annoyed with you, would you say that she's kind of being like unreasonable to be mad that essentially like, especially if she found out you lied, would you say it's unreasonable for her to be like kind of pissed off and like over you because you lied?
No, I think that would be pretty reasonable. Like if she found out I lied and like, yeah, no, I think that would be totally reasonable.
Okay, that's fair. That would basically where I fall. That's why I'm like, I probably wouldn't recommend it because if she finds out, there's a high chance of social repercussion. Yeah. But that's kind of where I'm like, if you want to do like slightly shitty things, you can just be aware that there are like social repercussions. And I am never going to stand behind you and be like, based, Giga Chad, go. Yes, man.
Do you believe in karma?
No, but I do believe in like social consequences. But I don't believe in karma. Like what goes around comes around. No, and there's two. I'm going to be honest. Andrew Tate exists. There's no way karma. Like unless like something horrible happens to him eventually. No. There's.
Yeah, you really think he's that bad?
Yes.
Because like when I'm thinking of an example of shitty people for why karma, I also agree with you. I don't think karma exists, but there's like 10,000 people I would name before him.
Oh, for sure. Me too. I brought him up mostly because we mentioned him in this conversation already. Not because I was like trying to be like, oh, Andrew Tate's the worst human in the world.
Oh, okay. I just thought your mind went there automatically.
Yeah, like the dictator of like fucking Turkmenistan is like probably worse than Andrew Tate, obviously, but he's not really relevant to our conversation. That was why I brought up Andrew Tate. Yeah.
You know, there's this guy in Russia, Vladimir Putin. He's not the most ethical of dictators, but yeah. Here's an interesting one. Here's another interesting moral quandary. This is something that actually the red pill community does not like about me, and something where they question my ethics. So this is something I say a lot. I've had sex with many dudes' wives or girlfriends, but I would never in a million years have sex with my friends' girlfriends or wives. I have never once tried to take girls from my friends, nor would I in a bazillion years. I don't care if my friend had a girl who's a perfect 10. I wouldn't even, and if she was like throwing herself at me, I would never ever do it. But I have like zero moral quandary or close to zero moral quandary having sex with some dude's wife who I don't know. And they don't like that. They don't like that at all. I'm kind of curious where you stand on that.
Why do you not have a moral quandary over having sex with some other dude's wife, but not your
Because
friend?
because I don't know that guy and I have zero loyalty to him, but I have loyalty and obligation to my friend.
So it sounds like essentially with him, there's minimal level of social consequence, but with my friends, there's a high level of social consequence.
It's not bad. Let's assume that there will be no level. Like, let's assume in this hypothetical, which I guess would really not happen, there would be no level of social consequences. Meaning, like, let's assume like my friend, I know for a fact that my friend would forgive me, or something like
And
that.
he'd be like, it's totally okay, no
No, like
problem.
let's say I know he will be hurt, but he will forgive me, and it will not impact our relationship a little bit. And the guy whose wife I fuck, let's say he's never going to find out my name, so he's not going to like come to my house and shoot me. Like
But
let's
he'd
say
also be a little bit hurt.
let's assume he would actually be really hurt. Like I know that, like let's assume I have like information. Like I call God on speed dial. I'm like, yo, God, give me the 411 on this guy. He's like, oh, this guy's gonna get super upset, but he's not gonna shoot you. I can guarantee you that he's not gonna come over, and there's going to be no social repercussions at all for doing that. And with my friend, I talk to God, and he's like, yeah, like he's going to get pretty upset, but he's going to forgive you in like 2 days. And there's not going to be social repercussions either way. My answer would still stand. I would have zero moral quandary of fucking that, or close to zero, fucking that guy's wife. But I would never in a bazillion years fuck my friend's wife.
Why?
Again, it goes back to what I was saying. I have a sense of loyalty to my friends. I don't have a sense of loyalty to a random person who I don't know.
Why are you loyal to your friends?
Because I care about my friends.
Why do you care about your friends?
Um, I mean, I don't know. It's like kind of asking like, why do you love someone? I don't know, because like they're like whatever, they're a person who's important in my life.
So if you did something that hurt your friends, unrelated to sleeping with their girlfriend, would you feel bad?
Yeah, I would feel bad about doing anything that hurts my friends.
Like super guilty?
I mean, depends on how bad it is. Like if it's like forgetting to take the trash out for my roommate, probably not super guilty, but maybe mildly guilty. It just depends on the severity of the action,
Yeah.
my
But
level
you
of
feel
fear.
like a little bad.
Yeah, if I do something that hurts my friend, I would feel a little bad. Yeah,
And so why do you feel bad for hurting your friend?
Be- because I like my friend, I care about them.
Yeah, but why does you feel specifically bad?
Well, like, I mean, the answer is still the same because I like and care about them. That's why I feel bad, right? Like I don't want to hurt people I care about and I like.
Right. Okay. So I guess here's basically the issue with the guy friend, with the random dude. I would argue that this actually is a social consequence issue. If you hurt your friend, there's an inherent social cost, which is intrinsic. You feel really guilty because you care about this person. There is a consequence. If you don't care about a person, it's a lot harder to feel guilty about hurting their feelings. You don't know them. There isn't really any social cost. So to me, it basically says, I'm willing to do something as long as there's minimal social consequence. And I'm going to argue feeling guilty is a social consequence.
Um, I've never defined feeling guilty as a social consequence, but that's just semantics. If we take feeling guilty as a social consequences, then yeah, you would be correct. I've just never put it in that category.
Right. And so this is essentially like I'm concerned about harming my in group, but I don't care about the out group. And the reason why typically we don't care much about the out group is because there isn't a social consequence, because we care about our inner group, because our inner group is to some extent we map ourselves into and onto them. So when we feel guilty for our friends, to some extent we are putting ourselves in their shoes and we're like, man, I wouldn't like it if that happened. Oh, I feel really bad. I know how much harm that sucks for me. And it feels gross that I've done that to somebody that's in my in group that I can map myself onto. Some random dude, you can't. You don't know him, anything about him. You can't map yourself onto him. I imagine if you fucked a guy's wife and then you sat down and had a long heart to heart and you really connected with him, you'd feel really bad about it.
Yeah, probably. I would probably. I don't know if I would feel really bad, but I would start feeling bad. Yeah. But I guess it's like since we're kind of talking about ethics, it's like I do have a strong distinction in how ethical I am when it comes to people I care about, when it comes to people I don't care about. Meaning,
Mhm.
like, also like going back to aside from banging dudes' wives, lying, right? I'm not okay with telling any kind of lies to my friends, whether it's lying by omission or maybe a super tiny white lie. If my girl is like, I don't know, like let's say she's like looking a little chubby one day and she asked me if she looks fat, like I guess that could be a white lie, but that's like a super minor one that's done for her benefit. But aside from that, uh, I have a much basically what I'm trying to get is I have a much higher ethical standard that I apply to my friends than I do to random people that I don't know. There's still an ethical standard to other people. I'm not gonna like steal from a random dude, even though I don't know him. And I
Mm.
could totally envision putting myself in his situation. So it's not a lack of empathy. I can see it. I
Well, it
just,
is a lack of empathy because you can't really have empathy with your outgroup, right? You're essentially describing tribalism to me. I care about my in-group, but I don't really care about my outgroup. If I can't map myself onto them, if I can't really see myself in them to some degree, if I have no level of
your mic just cut off. Oh,
yeah, sorry, there's an insanely loud truck
okay.
that keeps driving up and down. I'm assuming some 15-year-old got gifted a diesel recently, and he's just, yeah, small town. Woo, I'm so cool. Anyways, what you're basically describing to me is tribalism, where fundamentally you're saying, well, if he's part of my in group, I'd feel bad because he's part of my in group, and we care about our in groups. The issue is this is not a repeatable ethic. You wouldn't like that being done to you. You would not like a world where the other guy who's you don't know and you're his outgroup sleeps with your wife. You would not like that, I imagine.
Well, so here's the interesting thing about me. So if my girlfriend cheated on me, I would 100% blame her and 0% blame the guy. Like I never understood this thing that when a guy finds out his girlfriend wife is cheating on him, he like fights the guy. That reaction never made any sense to me. I would. I mean, I don't think I would like shake his hand and give him a hug or something, but I would not fight him. I would not have any kind of aggression towards him. I'm not saying I would like fight my girl or something like that, but like
Mhm.
all my frustration, which would not be, in a violent way. I just want to keep clarifying that it would be in a like, like we're done type of way. Would be towards my girlfriend. All my negative feelings would be towards her and not towards that guy in that action. So like, and if like I saw that guy at a bar the next day, I'll probably just ignore him. I wouldn't. Believe me, I'm like not afraid of confrontation at all. I actually kind of enjoy confrontation. So if I was legitimately displeased with someone, I would 100% confront them. But I just would not be legitimately displeased with that guy. I'll just be like very neutral on him. I'll be like, whatever he did what he did. Whatever. I could see myself doing that. Now going back to empathy, I'm just pulled up the definition. Empathy is the ability to understand feelings of another, and I can totally understand the feelings of that guy. You know how much it hurts to have someone bang your wife,
Mhm.
uh, so I can understand it. It's just that I don't really care that much.
Right.
If-
So the responsibility of the actions has nothing to do with whether you are actually being ethical by sleeping with the wife or he's being ethical by sleeping with the wife, right? I would agree with you about the responsibility. I think it's very silly. For example, we see the same thing with women, right? They're always mostly mad at the other woman. They often like attack him. Sometimes they'll even like stay. A lot of time we'll see people who've been cheated on who stay with their partner who cheated on them, and they'll just villainize the extra person, which is extremely silly. But that doesn't actually remove the ethical obligation on the other person.
Yeah, I mean, like, let me kind of flip the question. Like, well, for example, hypothetical, like, you're married, right? Like, let's say you found out your husband cheated, right? How much of the blame would be on him, and how much would be on the girl?
Sorry, if I found out that my husband cheated.
Yeah.
So again, I'll answer this, but to be clear, responsibility of action doesn't remove another individual from ethical obligation, in my view. So 100% of the responsibility would be on my husband because
Mhm.
he is the one in the contract with me. The issue is she is still engaging in an unethical behavior because essentially, to some degree, we don't really seem to want a society where everyone feels okay just fucking other people's husbands and wives behind their back, right?
What about let me pose a different hypothetical. What if it was your husband cheated on you with your friend?
Who would I feel
Yeah,
is responsible?
how would the split be in that case?
The responsibility is still on my husband, but she
You
is not freed from the ethical obligation that she has to me. And I would say, to some extent, she probably has a higher ethical obligation. But I think we should have some level of ethical obligation to non in group members.
you would not put any responsibility on your friend in that situation?
Not for the actual decision, no. Other than like the fact that she made the decision, but the ethical weight of the responsibility is mostly on my husband. Her unethical behavior is though being willing to sleep with my husband.
I would if it's a close friend, I would argue it would be 50-50 for myself. Like if my girlfriend cheated on me with like one of my close friends, I would say it's 50-50 responsibility. My friend owes me loyalty and he should not have been doing that. Versus a
Why does
random
he owe you loyalty?
uh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that's just like I think a key part of any relationship, whether it's romantic or platonic, is loyalty. Like I'm loyal to all my friends, and all my friends are loyal to me. Same
Do you
thing.
do you tell them that though?
Um, I don't think I directly like sit down and have a conversation with them, but I think it's like heavily implied, like through like the conversations we have. So my
How
friend,
would it be implied? Yeah, walk me through how it's implied.
like through the stories I tell and through like the experiences we have, I think my friends can all pretty accurately like one thing. Like I have some faults as a human being, but loyalty is certainly not one of them. I think every single person, even ex girlfriends, even ex girlfriends would agree that I'm a really loyal person. Like I'm a really loyal human being, and I think that like is pretty clearly communicated. I don't think I could point out like a specific example of a story I tell, but I think that's also pretty clearly communicated that that's like an important trait to me. Like I think every single person in my life would know without a doubt. Like you say, what do you think are the top three things that Alex values? I think all of them would say loyalty would be in the like top three list.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's implicit, right? There's some level of implicit contract that's established with you and your friends.
It's an implicit contract. Yeah.
So to the same, I would argue that we've kind of all got a pretty good social implicit contract understood that generally you don't mess with other people's spouses or partners. And if you do, it's a shitty thing, right? So I would argue that the same implicit contract that you have with your friends, while you feel it more, is very much similar to the implicit contract that we have with strangers. It's just the level of like emotional damage, right? If my friend cheated on with my husband, I would be more hurt than if a random stranger, but it would still be unethical for all of the members involved.
Yeah, so I would kind of disagree with that. I would say that I definitely have a strong implicit contract with my friends, but I have no implicit contract with a stranger. Uh,
Absolutely do. That's why you, for example, like you don't go into people's houses and steal things, even if they're strangers. There's an implicit contract that we all know. You don't really take shit that's not yours. There's also somewhat level of a legal contract.
well, yeah, the big one that's like highly illegal,
Yeah, but there's tons of implicit societal contracts that we have established. For example, like typically you don't butt in line, right? Even just with strangers, we broadly know you don't butt in line, and it's kind of a shitty thing to do it. It's just mostly an implicit contract. It's something established, but we mostly don't violate it. So the idea that we don't have contracts, even implicit contracts with people who aren't part of our in group, just isn't really true in a society.
Okay, you're right. I think I was kind of phrasing implicit contract differently, but you're right. Yeah, we do have implicit contracts with strangers. I guess the difference for me is then this: I would be okay ignoring certain implicit contracts, certain with strangers that I would not be okay with ignoring with my friends. I guess therein lies a distinction. My friends have a major preference in my mind and how much I'm going to honor an implicit contract than random strangers. That's not to say I'm actually generally like I'm a very nice person. Like like I'm pretty nice to strangers and everyone. But like I don't know, to give like another example, like let's say like someone is being rude to me. Like I don't know, like let's do this. Like let's say I'm doing a debate right with a stranger and they're being rude to me. At that point, I'm going to make them look bad, right? But if it's my friend who's like another YouTuber who I've had conversation with and who I like, and they're being like rude to me, I'm not gonna make them look bad. I might just text them, and be like, "Yo, man, like, come on, cut it out," right? Because I care for them, So that's kind of like, so it's just like I give a highly preferential treatment to my friends and loved ones that I do to random people, and it's like an interesting concept where I think I'm not the only one that does that, but I would say that more people are not like me, where they like basically they more or less do treat everyone the same, where the amount of preferential treatment they give to their friends is minimal. But for me, it's like very substantial.
I actually think most people are like you. The issue is that for our society to work, we've done a lot of really hard work for people to understand that you have some level of implicit contract to people that are outside of what you perceive as your own tribe. And the only way our society even functions is by having some level of control of that. So essentially what I'm saying is what you did essentially and the ethic that you're prescribing to yourself cannot be replicated ever. It can't be maintained across society, which makes it a bad ethical system, which makes it essentially, yes, you did an unethical thing.
The question comes down to also how much do you care that you did something negative for society as a whole? And I think
Yes.
different people have different levels of care. I'm not saying I don't care at all, right? I just think I might care less than you would. And also depends on the thing. There's some issues that are much more sensitive to us. So, like an issue that's like very sensitive to me, I don't know, there's several, like animals, right? I have a husky. I love dogs. I'm like super sensitive to like anything with like, that involves like animal cruelty or animal struggle. So like if I saw even the slightest mistreatment of an animal, even if it's someone I don't know, I would speak up. Like, let's say someone, like, when hitting, obviously anyone would step in, but let's say someone is just like yelling at a dog, right? Like, most people would just be like, whatever, like, they would just move on. Like, I will actually come in and be like, yo, dude, chill the fuck out. Like, don't yell at your dog, right? And that's just an issue that's very sensitive to me. Like, another one would be like Lyme disease, because I've had Lyme disease for like 7 years. So it's like, that's also an issue that I'm like very sensitive to. But there's also issues that I'm not sensitive to at all, right? Where like there's a lot more gray area. And I guess we all prioritize issues that are sensitive to us to a varying degree, where we're going to be much more ethical on issues that we, that are personal to us or that we really care about than on issues that we're not. Does that kind of make sense?
I definitely understand. Essentially, though, I guess I would argue is it is probably better overall for people to have some sort of ethical system that is replicable across society. It doesn't have to be fully identical, but this is why, for example, in society, there are just things that we reasonably believe to be wrong. So I think if it is reasonable to believe, for example, that you would do harm to somebody by sleeping with their wife, most people would agree that it is unethical to do. And I think overall, our society is better and improved, and there's less harm in our society if more people believe in that. So I'm not trying to. My chat is fucking screaming about Kant. I'm not a universalist, and I'm not trying to claim I'm a universalist. This is functional utilitarianism to some extent. You need some level of like group ethic that to some extent guides and like determines things, and this is mostly negotiated through contracts. So it is possible that in 40 years we could negotiate it, and it's actually like totally okay to cheat. Overall, just in general, that like in general, we might start to view it as unethical to even set lines in a relationship that would constitute cheating, right? Our society might get there, but that's not where we're at today, which is why we can basically reasonably say, yeah, it seems to be the case that everyone would view this as unethical.
Yeah, no, that's like this is like the one issue where like the red pill community, 98% of the red pill community fundamentally disagrees with me on. They're like, whenever I bring this up, they're like, dude, that's so messed up that you would fuck a guy's wife. I'm like, first of all, I've done it many times. And second of all, I probably still would, right? Like, and I haven't changed my position on that. So that's like one issue where, yeah, like the red pill community is like not that fond of me on like that specific issue. I don't know. Ethics are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Where we all draw the line, right? And like, but I think also one interesting thing is like, I think this is kind of like my observation. And I know we've been going for like 3.5 hours, uh, so we can like wrap up after this. But like one interesting observation I have is like, I think the SJW community or whatever, like the hardcore leftists, they they pick the worst battles ever. Like they're focused on the people who are like mildly unethical and just ignore all the people who are extremely unethical. So they're like freaking out about a guy who like forgot to like I don't know like forgot to like get the girl an Uber home or something like that, or maybe like didn't cuddle with her after sex, but they're ignoring like the fucking dude that raped 50 chicks or something like that, like the criminal that's out there, which like always blows my mind how bad they are at picking battles and just focusing on like the mild offenders while totally ignoring the big offenders on these ethical issues.
I don't know if I would agree that the left would care more about the first thing than the second. I think they'd actually care more about the guy raping 50 women. The issue is the left's solutions when they talk about this is a lot of virtue signaling and like broadband paradigm things of like rape bad. And it's like, okay, cool. And they're like, teach your sons that rape bad. And it's like, yeah, everyone does that, right? Like, first of all, it's a very small subset of men that are doing the raping. Second of all, they probably have extremely broken homes. Third, our society overall thinks rape is bad, and so mostly what I find is they have extremely blunt solutions to issues. which is especially in like the dating paradigm. And then they're just pretty dishonest about certain stuff, right? They'll be like, no, women aren't attracted to like more dominant, assertive men. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, of course they are. Like, we can talk about if that should change, but that is just objectively like there is a reality that fuck boys pull girls. They just, and they're assholes. They're oftentimes really shitty guys, right? They're like willing to lie and manipulate and like trick a woman into the bed with him and all this stuff is really shitty. And but it's effective, right? And so I think the issue is the left is somewhat not willing to engage with reality, but I would argue the right does this too. And then they often have broad sweeping suggestions about how to fix things that are dumb.
I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but I would also say like an example of this is like they're so focused on like the very, very minimal amount of sexism that takes place in America and American government, right? Like, oh, America is such a bad patriarchy, but then like they completely ignore like the Middle East where there's like where literally women can't even drive a car. I know Saudi Arabia recently like gave women, but like there's legit fucking patriarchy and sexism that goes on in the Middle East and other parts of the world that is like 500 times worse than America, where they're like, oh, America is so patriarchal, but they just ignore like the elephant in the room, which is like these other countries that treat women 10,000 times worse than America ever even did. So it's like stuff like that where I'm just like rolling my eyes. And when you even like bring it up, you're like, well, like, okay, so what do you think about like Saudi Arabia then? Because I'm pretty sure they treat their women worse than us. And then they'll be like, well, it's a different culture. Like they just excuse it away. And it's like, dude, if your thing is like protecting a woman, then I think like the big elephant in the room is not America, where women live a pretty decent life overall. It's like these Middle East countries where women get treated like literally like cattle, basically.
Yeah, and I mean the issue, right? If I like steelman them, what they'd argue back is, of course, both of these things matter, but the issue is there's not a ton that I can do about the Middle East stuff. There is something I can do in my own country, and then yes, some of them will also just like be like, there's kind of like this weird xenocentrism, but it's like because xenocentrism is typically where you like think you just like focus on your own culture and there's a sense of like superiority, whereas I would say like they have a xenocentric analysis like most people do. It's just like focused mostly on like how awful their nation is, and it's very strange.
Yeah, no, it is because like if the main thing you care about is like women's rights, which is reasonable, I think. If you're a woman, right, it's reasonable for the main thing for you to care about is women's rights. But it's like someone in the chat was just saying like there's countries in East Africa where they do forced genital mutilation, right? That's
well, they do it in America too, but yeah.
They cut like a woman's clit off by force in America.
Like female circumcision is like distinctly on the rise in America. In fairness, female circumcision, there's some complexities to it. There's 4 levels. But yes, this does actually, it's not legal, but it does happen a lot.
Wait, really? I was not aware of this. Like, well, can you be more specific about that?
Oh, I'd have to dig up stats on it.
Or just like from what you remember. This is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Sure. It's been a long time since I really don't like reporting stats when I don't have them in the US. It's pretty easy. So FGM, it's about 11.4% of girls within within the correct ethnic group in America still experience some form of female genital mutilation. Now, the issue is, I think, to be honest, I think circumcision's also insane and just ridiculous to do.
I agree with that.
Just like in general, I don't know why we keep just chopping up kids' genitals. Just like, stop chopping off the foreskin, leave the clits alone. But there's different types of female genital mutilation. So there's typically like the removal of the menorah, so like the kind of the inside flaps. And only those, and it's kind of a purely like aesthetic surgery, but it's done again on like children under 3. Then there is going to be there's a second level that I believe is the removal of that, and I believe that might be where they stitch the vagina up as well, like to close it for a bit. And then there's a third one where it's the removal of like the clit, the menorah, and like a sewing up of the vagina, and then they remove that suture, I believe, afterwards, and like kind of make it smaller.
What's the ethnic group where that happens?
It's typically Islamic groups that do it, but I believe I was reading that there's another kind of smaller, less popularly known group as well that does this. I can't remember their name.
well, that kind of makes sense. It's like still like the Islamic culture, which goes back to what I was saying earlier, like Middle East. But yeah, okay, that I didn't know. I did not know about that. I just assumed that like no doctor in the U.S. would perform that operation. But I guess maybe they're like, I don't know, paying cash or going to Mexico. I don't know how that's happening because imagine most doctors are like, yeah, I'm not going to lose my license over this really weird procedure you want to have done for your like 3-year-old daughter. Uh, if they're just being pragmatic because it takes so long to get a medical license and whatnot. But okay, I guess I could kind of foresee that happening. I wasn't aware of
I'm
that.
not an
No.
expert on it though, so like take everything I say with some grain of salt. The stats are you just Google them, but yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I guess like that was like the point I was trying to make is like if you're like care about like women's rights and like that's like your number one thing, it's like there's much bigger offenders in America. Like it's like way higher. It's not like 50% worse. It's like 10,000% worse in some countries.
Yeah, right. Like if you care about like women's rights in America, you should probably be talking about like the lack of like rape kits being analyzed. You should be talking about like some level of judicial reform so that like rapists get more time and like more steeper probation, stuff like that.
Yeah, the rape kit analysis is something I learned about only in the last year, but I was shocked to see it was like something only like 11% of them or 15% of them get analyzed. Like the
Yeah, it's really
statistic on
low.
that was like pretty jarring, which is like a lack of funding issue.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, cool. I mean, we've gone for a while. This was a really good conversation, though. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thanks for chatting with me and giving me so much of your time today.
Yeah,
Appreciate
for
that.
sure. Likewise. But yeah, I might be down to do the panel. So you're saying it's tomorrow at 8 p.m., right?
We bumped it earlier, so we're going to do 6 p.m. Eastern.
Oh yeah, I don't think I'll be able to make it then because
Okay.
yeah, I won't finish my shit till 8 p.m. But definitely let me know about the next one. I'll try to pop on if I can.
Sure. No worries.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Have a good night. Take care.
Okay, have a good night. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.